What's up, guys? Welcome to Watch Harry. We've got something special today. What if Daphne Greengrass hired goblins to audit Dumbledore and found 94 illegal spells placed on Harry's magic? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The audit. Daphne Greengrass did not do things without a reason. This was a fact her mother had drilled into her from the age of 6, standing in the receiving room of Greengrass Manor with the particular brand of cold patience that distinguished old pure-blood families from new money. Every action is a message, Daphne. Every inaction is a louder one. Her mother had said it the way other women said good morning, reflexively, without thinking, because it had long since become the architecture of how she moved through the world. So when Daphne sat down at the narrow writing desk in the back corner of the Hogwarts library on a grey Tuesday in November, with a Gringotts pamphlet spread open in front of her and a quill she hadn't yet dipped, she was not acting without reason. She was acting with approximately 17 reasons, which was her usual number before doing something that most people would call reckless. The pamphlet had come in the post 3 days ago, tucked inside a letter from her father about the family's quarterly Gringotts review. Magical Inheritance Audit Services, comprehensive review of active spells, enchantments, bindings, and restrictions on any magical person's core and bloodline assets. It was dry, procedural language, the kind that made most wizards' eyes slide off the page without reading. Daphne had read it 4 times. She'd been thinking about Harry Potter for longer than she'd admitted to anyone. Not romantically. Or, well, not primarily romantically. Daphne was honest with herself even when she wasn't honest with anyone else, and honestly, Harry Potter was objectively compelling in the way that catastrophically powerful things are always compelling. Like watching lightning from inside a stone building. You're safe, theoretically. But you keep watching. What bothered her wasn't his fame or his scar or the endless chosen one mythology that the entire wizarding world seemed to need the way it needed oxygen. What bothered her was his magic. She'd noticed it in 3rd year, actually. They'd been in the same charms class, a scheduling accident that nobody on either side of the house divide had been particularly pleased about, and Professor Flitwick had been running them through summoning charms for the first time. Most of the class had struggled. The usual mediocrity. Harry had performed it correctly on his 3rd attempt, which was unremarkable, except that when the book hit his hand, every other object in a 12-inch radius had trembled. Not moved. Trembled, like something had pulled at them and then caught itself. Flitwick had blinked at his desk and adjusted his papers and moved on. Nobody else had noticed. Daphne had noticed. She'd kept noticing after that. The way his spells occasionally had texture they shouldn't have, illumos that lit not just the tip of his wand but the entire wand shaft, warm gold instead of white, for just a second before he seemed to unconsciously dial it back. A reducto in dada that hit the practice dummy so hard it had left a scorch mark in the stone floor 6 inches past where the dummy had been. The way objects sometimes moved before he cast, in the direction he was looking, as if the magic was impatient with the words. She'd mentioned it to Tracy once. Tracy had said maybe he's just powerful and gone back to her potions homework. Which was a reasonable answer. It was also an incomplete answer, and incomplete answers made Daphne itch. Because the thing was, Harry Potter didn't fight like someone with that much magic. He fought like someone who had learned to fight with his offhand. He fought like someone who'd been handed a knife and taught to use only the blunt edge. There was a gap between what she occasionally glimpsed and what he actually produced, and that gap was wide enough to drive a carriage through, and she did not understand why. She understood it now. Or she had a theory. And the pamphlet in front of her was how she intended to test it. The form was straightforward. Name of the subject. Date of birth. Relationship of petitioner to subject. Reason for audit. Gringotts required a nominal fee, 40 galleons, which Daphne had already extracted from her personal vault account, and a drop of the petitioner's blood on the seal at the bottom, binding them to truthfulness about their stated relationship and purpose. She filled in Harry's name in her careful, vertical script. July 31, 1980. She paused at relationship to subject. After a moment she wrote, academic associate and concerned party acting in the subject's interest due to his inability, as a minor, to petition independently. It was technically accurate. It was also the kind of language that Gringotts would respect. Goblins cared almost nothing for social relationships and enormously for legal precision. The phrase acting in the subject's interest carried specific weight under magical law. She wrote suspected illegal magical restriction on subject's core under reason for audit. Then she paused again. That was the thing she hadn't told anyone, the kernel of it that felt almost embarrassingly presumptuous when she looked at it directly. She was a sixth-year Slytherin girl with a theory about a Gryffindor boy's magical suppression, filing a formal audit with the Goblin Nation. If she was wrong, she'd have wasted 40 galleons and given Blaze material to mock her with for approximately the rest of their lives. If she was right, she dipped her quill, pressed her thumb to the seal, murmured the requisite acknowledgement, and rolled the parchment. She'd give it to the Gringotts Owl Post in Hogsmeade on Saturday. She did not let herself think too hard about what if she was right looked like on the other side. It was a very long drop from that particular ledge, and she preferred to take it without looking down. Saturday came with the particular vengeance that Scottish November reserved for people who'd convinced themselves it wasn't that cold. Daphne wore her grey wool coat and the greengrass scarf, deep green, almost black, with a silver border that her grandmother had charmed to repel wind, and walked to Hogsmeade with Tracy and Blaze on either side of her like elegant, complaining bookends. "I don't understand," Blaze said, "why anyone chooses to be outside when the alternative is inside." He had his hands buried in his coat pockets and was walking with the hunched misery of someone deeply opposed to weather as a concept. Inside exists. We invented inside. It was our greatest achievement as a species and we keep abandoning it. "You're Italian," Tracy said. "You have a constitutional aversion to cold." "I'm half Italian. The other half is also opposed to this." Daphne wasn't really listening. She was watching, as she often was, the loose knot of Gryffindors walking 20 yards ahead of them down the main street, Weasley's red hair like a beacon, Granger's brown curls, and Harry Potter with his collar turned up against the wind and his hands shoved in his pockets in an unconscious mirror of Blaze. He was laughing at something Weasley had said. It transformed his face in a way she didn't usually see from a classroom distance. He looked, for a second, like a genuinely normal 16-year-old. The impression was gone by the time they reached the post office. She dispatched the Gringotts envelope with a third-class security seal, anonymous from the recipient's end until Gringotts confirmed her identity internally, paid the owl handler, and turned back to find Blaze reading the audit pamphlet she'd accidentally left sticking out of her coat pocket. He looked up. He had extraordinarily expressive eyes for someone who worked so hard at inscrutability. Right now they were expressing profound interest, doing its best to look like mild curiosity. "Magical inheritance audit," he said. "For whom?" "None of your business. The name on the request form you're attempting to subtly retrieve is Potter." He handed it back. "I'm not going to tell anyone, Daphne. I'm curious, not idiotic." She tucked the pamphlet away. "I think something's been done to his magic. I want to know what." Blaze was quiet for a moment. That was one of the things she actually valued about him, he didn't fill silence with noise. "And you think the goblins will find it? If it exists, they'll find it. They're the only ones who can. Gringotts auditors work outside the ministry's jurisdictional reach. Whatever was done, if it was done, they'll see it independent of anyone who might want it hidden." Blaze looked at her for a long moment with the particular expression he wore when he was recalibrating something. "You're going to make a lot of people very angry." "I'm aware. Just making sure you are." He held the door open for Tracy, who was coming back out of the sweet shop with a small paper bag. "Tea at Madame Pootafoot's? I need to sit down and process the fact that Daphne Greengrass is apparently going to war on behalf of Harry Potter." "I'm not going to war. I'm conducting an audit." Those are the same thing, Tracy said cheerfully, and held out the bag. Caramel? The response came 11 days later. Not by owl. By goblin. A short, broad-shouldered goblin in full Gringotts formal wear, dark jacket, gold buttons, the insignia of the audit division on his lapel, appeared in the entrance hall of Hogwarts on a Wednesday morning before breakfast, presented himself to a deeply startled Professor McGonagall, and stated in a voice with the texture of gravel and the temperature of a February morning that he required a private meeting with one Daphne Greengrass at her earliest convenience, by which he meant now. Daphne was halfway through her scrambled eggs when a second-year Slytherin girl appeared at her elbow with the message. She set down her fork. Across the table, Blaise looked up from the Daily Prophet. Tracy stopped eating. Go, Blaise said. She went. The goblin's name was Sharpclaw. He was older than he looked, which was how goblins worked, aged in stone rather than flesh, and he had a quality that she could only describe as specifically contained, the way a pressure vessel is contained. The energy going on inside him was considerable. What came out was measured and deliberate and would brook absolutely no nonsense. McGonagall had given them the use of a small conference room off the entrance hall, usually reserved for parent meetings, and stood outside it in a way that conveyed she was not listening and also was absolutely listening. Sharpclaw set a leather document case on the table. It was sealed with 3 separate goblin rune locks, each one keyed to a different level of clearance. He pressed his thumb to each in sequence, then looked at Daphne across the table with eyes that were sharp and dark and comprehensively unimpressed with human reactions to goblin efficiency. Miss Greengrass, he said. You filed an audit request on the subject Harry James Potter, born July 31, 1980, on November the 7th of this year. I did. On the grounds of suspected illegal magical restriction. Yes. He opened the document case. The parchment inside was dense, multiple sheets, each covered in fine goblin script with what appeared to be magical notation running down the right-hand margin of each page in red ink. She'd expected maybe 5 pages. There were easily 30. I am Sharpclaw, Senior Auditor, Gringotts Magical Assessment Division. I have conducted audits of this nature for 41 years. He picked up the top sheet and placed it in front of her with the air of someone setting down a piece of evidence at trial. In 41 years, I have never submitted a report of this length. Daphne looked down at the top sheet. Then she looked up at him. How many did you find? Sharpclaw's expression didn't change. But something in his eyes did, something old and furious and carefully leashed. 94 discrete magical interferences on Harry Potter's core, bloodline assets, and natural magical development. 47 classified under Goblin law as illegal binding. 22 classified as intentional suppression. 18 as unauthorized redirection. And 7-inch, he tapped the document with one finger, classified under Category 1, active magical assault. By which I mean spells not merely passive in their restriction but actively draining magical energy from the subject on an ongoing basis. The room was very quiet. 7 active drains, Daphne said. 7. They have been operating continuously, most of them for 15 years. The earliest was placed on the subject at approximately 14 months of age. 14 months. She did the math without meaning to. 14 months meant 1981. 1981 meant, after Voldemort attacked him, she said. Shortly after, yes. Several appear to have been placed in the immediate aftermath, when the subject was magically vulnerable due to the rebounding of a killing curse and therefore unable to resist or register the interferences. Sharpclaw's voice remained level. She suspected it remained level in the way that a knife's edge remains level, by design, and not without considerable sharpness beneath the surface. The magical signatures on the majority of the spells are consistent with a single caster. An extremely powerful, highly skilled single caster. You identified the caster. We identified the magical signature profile. A formal identification requires ministry cooperation, which we are not requesting. We are, however, providing our analysis, which is," he turned to page 4 of the document and set it before her, unambiguous. The magical signature profile was rendered in goblin notation, which she could read approximately 40% of from her independent studies. But the analysis summary at the bottom was in English, and it said, "Signature consistent across all 94 interferences. Confidence rating, 99.7%. Assessment, single caster, operating with mastery-level skill in core binding, emotional suppression charms, and blood ward manipulation." "This is a legal document," Sharpclaw said. "It is binding under Goblin law and recognized under the Goblin Wizard Accord of 1752 as admissible in formal proceedings." He looked at her steadily. "What you choose to do with it is your business, Miss Greengrass. However." She waited. "I have been in this profession for 41 years, he said. "I have never once reached out beyond my role as auditor to make a personal recommendation to a petitioner." He set both hands flat on the table. "The subject of this audit is currently attending this school. He is 16 years old. He has been carrying 94 illegal magical interferences for the majority of his life, 7 of which are actively draining his power this minute, as we sit here. Under Goblin law, the removal of these restrictions is the subject's legal right and can be performed by Gringotts without ministry interference." His eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that she suspected he usually kept on a much shorter leash. "I would suggest, in my professional capacity, that someone tells him. Soon." Daphne looked down at the 30 pages of careful, damning goblin script. "Today," she said. "I would agree." She picked up the document case, latched it, and stood. "You'll need to be present when we tell him. He'll have questions I can't answer." Sharpclaw regarded her for a moment, then stood as well. "I had anticipated that." He produced a small card from his breast pocket, heavy cream stock, Gringotts seal, his name and communication rune on the front. "I have cleared my schedule." She took the card. "Thank you, Sharpclaw." "Thank me," he said, "by making sure this is not buried." Finding Harry Potter alone was harder than it sounded. He was rarely alone, which Daphne supposed made sense for someone who'd been navigating assassination attempts since the age of 11. You developed a pack instinct. And when he wasn't with Weasley and Granger, he was in class, or at Quidditch practice, or inexplicably somewhere in the castle doing something that involved running slightly later than everyone else and looking distracted. She found him at 11:30, in one of the corridor alcoves on the 5th floor where she happened to know students went to study when the library was full, because she went there herself. He was alone, finally, with a Transfiguration textbook open on the bench beside him and a piece of parchment balanced on his knee and the expression of someone doing homework primarily out of obligation rather than interest. He looked up when she stopped in front of him. His first expression was neutral surprise, the face of someone recalibrating which social context applied. "Slytherin. Girl. Stopping on purpose." Then he settled into cautious attention, which was actually more respect than she expected and more intelligence than he usually got credit for. "Greengrass," he said. "Potter." She sat down across from him without being invited, which she noted made him blink but not object. "I need to talk to you about something. It's important." "Okay." He closed the textbook. She gave him points for that. He hadn't made a face or asked what does a Slytherin want, he'd just closed the book and given her his attention. "What's going on?" "This is going to be a strange conversation," she said. "I need you to let me get through the first part before you react. Not because your reaction won't be valid, but because you'll need the complete picture to react to it correctly." He looked at her steadily. "You're starting like something went wrong." "Something did go wrong. A long time ago. I've just found out about it and I think you should know." She set the document case on the bench between them. 11 days ago I filed a magical inheritance audit on you at Gringotts. A formal goblin assessment of active spells, enchantments, and bindings on your magical core and bloodline. The silence that followed had a very specific quality. Not anger, not yet, more like the moment a chess player sees the board 3 moves before a kill and goes completely still. "You filed it on me," he said. "Without telling me. Without telling you. I couldn't tell you." The audit requires the petitioner to act independently of the subject so that neither party can influence the results. She met his eyes. "I know you have no reason to trust me. I'm asking you to look at the results anyway." "Why?" "Because you deserve to know what's been done to your magic." Another silence. Longer. She watched him process the phrase, "what's been done to your magic," and watched it land in whatever part of him had always felt that gap she'd noticed, the one between the power she'd glimpsed and the power he could actually access. She watched it land and she watched him go very, very still. "How many?" he said. She'd been prepared for "what do you mean" or "what are you talking about?" The fact that his first question was how many told her something true about Harry Potter that she filed away immediately, he had suspected. Maybe not consciously, maybe not with language, but somewhere in the part of him that lived with his own magic every day, he had known that something was not right. 94, she said. The color left his face. Not dramatically, he didn't go pale the way people went pale in novels, white and gasping. He went still in the way stone goes still, an absolute, absolute quiet, the kind that comes before something very large moves. His hands, she noticed, had pressed flat against his knees. The parchment he'd been writing on lifted slightly off his leg, in a small, involuntary magical current, and then settled. 94, he said. The word came out completely even. The auditor is here. His name is Sharpclaw. He's in Hogwarts right now, he came this morning. He can explain what they are and how they were placed and who placed them. He can also explain the legal options for removing them. She kept her voice even to match his, because she sensed that what he needed right now was not someone else's emotion on top of his own. The report is in this case. 30 pages. His eyes had moved to the document case. He reached out and put one hand on it without opening it, the way you might put a hand on a door before deciding whether to open it. Who placed them, he said. It wasn't a question about whether she knew. It was a question about whether she'd tell him. The goblin notation points to a single magical signature across all 94. A very powerful, very skilled caster. She paused for exactly one beat. Someone with a long history of making decisions they believed were for your own good. His jaw tightened. He looked up from the document case and at her, and she saw it then, not anger, not yet, something beneath anger, something older and deeper and more foundational. He had carried something for a very long time without knowing what it was and he had just had it named, and the look on his face was the look of a person discovering that the weight that's been hurting them isn't an invisible weight at all but a set of chains someone wrapped around them while they slept. Dumbledore, he said. She didn't confirm or deny it. She said, Sharpclaw is waiting in the conference room off the entrance hall. You should read the report and let him walk you through it. Harry looked down at the document case for a long moment. His hand was still on it. She could feel the magic in the air around him, barely, just at the edges of perception, a low-frequency thrum like the building pressure before a thunderstorm. The parchment on the bench between them shivered. Then he stood, picked up the document case, and said, "Come on, then." It was the "come on then" that told her, more than anything else, exactly what kind of person Harry Potter actually was. She'd expected him to need a minute. She'd expected some degree of disbelief, or the particular masculine impulse to argue before accepting. Instead he'd picked up the case and moved, as if once a course of action was clear he saw no reason to delay it, even when, especially when, the action was walking toward the hardest possible truth. She followed him down the corridor, matching his pace, which was quick and purposeful without being frantic, and thought that she had made no mistake in filing that audit. Whatever happened next, this had been the right thing to do. She just hadn't expected to feel quite so certain about it quite so fast. McGonagall was still outside the conference room. She had, in the intervening hours, acquired a cup of tea, which she was holding in both hands with the focused attention of someone who was very much minding their own business and absolutely monitoring everything. When she saw Daphne and Harry coming down the entrance hall together, something moved across her face. McGonagall had a remarkable face for subtle expression, decades of professional Scottishness overlying what was, Daphne had always thought, a fundamentally passionate person, and she set the tea down on a side table. "Potter," she said, with a careful evenness that meant she knew at least something. "Professor," Harry said. "You know what this is about?" The goblin asked for a private room. "I'm a head of house, I notice things. I don't know specifics." She paused. "Should I come in?" Harry looked at Daphne. She nodded slightly. "Yes," he said to McGonagall. "You should probably come in." The conference room was small and square with a round table that took up most of it. Sharpclaw was seated at one end with a second set of documents in front of him. She hadn't seen those before, a second case, smaller, with a different seal on it. He looked at Harry with the acute assessment of someone whose professional life consisted of evaluating the magical state of human beings, and whatever he saw made his already contained expression go a notch more serious. "Mr. Potter," he said. "Sharpclaw," Harry said, and sat down. He set the document case in front of him and unlatched it and opened it to the first page. His face was still that extraordinary still. "Walk me through it." Sharpclaw looked at him for one moment longer than strictly necessary, and in that moment Daphne thought she saw something she hadn't expected from a goblin: respect. Not the distant, formal respect of a professional for a client, but the direct, personal respect of one being for another who is conducting themselves with more courage than most people manage. "The report before you," Sharpclaw said, "represents the full findings of a magical inheritance audit conducted over 8 days using Gringotts' most senior assessment methods. What we found," he paused. "I want to be very clear, Mr. Potter, before I explain the contents. The accuracy of this document is beyond dispute under Goblin law. Every finding is triple verified by independent assessors. This is not theory. It is fact." "Understood," Harry said. Sharpclaw turned to page 1. "Your magical core, as it naturally exists, was, prior to restriction, what we classify as an Omega-tier core. This is the highest classification in Goblin assessment, representing approximately the top 0.3% of magical humans ever recorded. An Omega-tier core, operating freely, would produce magic in the range of," he named a figure in Goblin units that meant nothing to Daphne but that made McGonagall, behind her, draw a very sharp, very quiet breath. Harry didn't react to the number. He was reading page 1. "Of the 94 interferences we found," Sharpclaw continued, 47 are binding spells. These are not passive, they are active restrictions on specific categories of magical expression. 11 bind your instinctive magic, the kind that responds before you consciously cast. 12 bind emotional amplification of magic, meaning spells fueled by strong emotion are deliberately capped. He tapped the relevant lines. 9 bind what we term magical empathy, a rare gift that allows a witch or wizard to sense and interact with ambient magic. You have this gift, Mr. Potter. It has been sealed since you were an infant." McGonagall sat down. Harry's hand, flat on the table, pressed down slightly. The tea in a small cup that someone had left on the side table shook. Once, briefly, and stopped. 22 spells are classified as intentional suppression, Sharpclaw went on, not pausing now, giving Harry the information at the pace a professional delivers difficult diagnoses, steadily, completely, without letting the weight of each fact crush the reception of the next. These target specific magical disciplines. You have suppression charms on your natural occlumency, you should be an instinctive occlumens, Mr. Potter, and instead you've spent 3 years being told you're bad at it. You have suppression on your transfiguration skill. On your charm's capacity. On your dueling instinct. Someone suppressed his dueling instinct. It was McGonagall's voice, very quiet, from behind Daphne. He's been during everything that's happened to him, yes, Sharpclaw said. The room was very quiet again. The 18 redirections, he continued, are the most technically sophisticated of the group. Magical redirection is not suppression, it doesn't cap or bind a magical skill. It takes the energy that would go into that skill and routes it elsewhere. Several of your redirections are routing core energy into what appear to be maintaining external enchantments. We believe these are the blood wards at your place of residence. He's been feeding the blood wards, Harry said. Not a question. His voice was completely steady. That steadiness was, Daphne found, more alarming than any amount of anger would have been. Correct. Your own core energy has been used, without your knowledge or consent, as the power source for a series of external enchantments that benefit. Sharpclaw paused with precision. Not primarily you. Privet Drive, Harry said. They protect the house. Not me. Me being inside the house. The distinction the ward work makes is fine enough to suggest this was known to the caster, yes. Harry turned to page 4. She watched his eyes move down it. She watched the moment he found whatever was on page 4, because his jaw tightened again, a muscle moving once in the side of his face, and then he smoothed it out and kept reading. The 7 Category 1 spells, he said. The active drains. Running continuously for 15 years, Sharpclaw said. They are working as of this morning. They are drawing power from your core at a rate that, if your core were not Omega tier, would have produced serious magical illness by now. Because your natural power is as significant as it is, the drain is survivable. The equivalent, approximately, of bleeding slowly. You don't die. But you never have enough. Daphne watched Harry absorb this and thought about the word survivable and what it meant that someone had designed a set of spells precise enough to know exactly how much to take without triggering a visible crisis. Harry closed the report. He set his hands on top of it. He was looking at the table now, not at Sharpclaw, not at any of them, looking at the table with the focused inward attention of someone who was feeling something enormous and deciding what to do with it. McGonagall said, quietly, Harry. He looked up at her. His eyes were very bright and very steady and utterly, completely resolved. Can they be removed? He said to Sharpclaw. All 94 can be removed by Gringotts assessors. It is your right under the Goblin Wizard Accord. No ministry authorization required. The removal process for the full 94, given the depth and complexity of the spells, would take approximately 3 sessions over 2 weeks. The first session would address the 7 active drains. These should be removed as a priority. Sharpclaw folded his hands. Removal of the active drains and initial bindings will produce an immediate effect on your magical output. I want to be direct with you about what that means, Mr. Potter. When the suppression is lifted, even partially, your magical power will be significantly greater than what you have ever experienced. Some people find that process disorienting. Harry looked at him directly. I'll manage. I have no doubt, Sharpclaw said, and he said it not as a reassurance but as an assessment, which was somehow both more professional and more moving than comfort would have been. Harry looked then at Daphne. She hadn't expected to be looked at. She'd placed herself slightly apart from the table for exactly this reason, observer rather than participant, giving him the room, and the directness of it caught her off guard for just a moment. Why? He said. Simple. Genuine. Not suspicious, curious. She could have given him the clinical answer. The magical anomaly she'd noticed in 3rd year, the gap, the theory. All of it accurate, all of it true. But his question was real, and she found she had a real answer. Because I'm good at noticing things that aren't right, she said. And you've been carrying something that wasn't right for a very long time. It bothered me. He held her gaze for a moment. Something in his expression shifted, a recalibration, the same one she'd seen in Blaze when she'd told him she was filing the audit, the particular look of someone updating a mental file. Then he turned back to Sharpclaw. "When can we start?" "I had anticipated this question," Sharpclaw said, and produced the second, smaller case from the table. "I took the liberty of preparing the authorization forms." McGonagall stood up. She was doing the thing Daphne had seen her do in class when she was feeling something strongly enough to need to stand, the ramrod straight posture intensifying further, as if she could armor herself with her own spine. "I need to notify the headmaster," she said. "Professor," Harry said. His voice was the same steady evenness. "Please don't." "Not yet." McGonagall looked at him. Her expression did something complicated, the conflict between her institutional loyalty and whatever else she was feeling written plainly across it for once, stripped of its professional mask. She said, "He will find out regardless, I know. I just need a day." He looked at her. "One day where I know before he knows that I know. That's all I'm asking." The silence lasted long enough that Daphne genuinely wasn't sure which way it would fall. Then McGonagall said, "I will require a complete copy of that report." It was not agreement and it was not disagreement. It was something better. It was a deputy headmistress telling a student, in the language of formal request, that she was on his side. Harry looked at Sharpclaw, who produced a second copy of the 30-page document from the second case with the air of someone who had been entirely prepared for this. "I had anticipated that as well," Sharpclaw said. The afternoon moved on without Harry, as afternoons do. He signed Sharpclaw's authorization forms, all of them, without hesitation, without reading them as carefully as Daphne would have, but she'd already read them when Sharpclaw laid them on the table and they were standard Gringotts service contracts, unambiguous and fair. The first removal session was scheduled for the following Friday. Sharpclaw tucked his cases back together, resealed them with 3 rune locks, and departed with the brisk efficiency of a professional who had done a hard thing well and was not in the habit of making speeches about it. McGonagall left with her copy of the report tucked very precisely under her arm and an expression that Daphne would not have liked to be on the receiving end of. That left the two of them in the small conference room with the afternoon light cutting across the table in long, pale November bars. 94, Harry said. "Yes. I don't know what I thought. Maybe 5. Maybe 10. He was looking at the table again, but differently now, not inward, more like the look of someone gazing at a distance they're about to cross. 94. "You're handling it remarkably well," Daphne said. He looked up. "Am I?" Most people would be in the corridor screaming. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, quick and wry. "I'm screaming internally. It's more efficient." She nodded. "That's very Slytherin of you. Don't tell anyone." He ran a hand through his hair, which was already comprehensively untidy and survived the gesture unchanged. He looked at her directly again. "Daphne." The use of her first name was deliberate. She registered it. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "You took on, you must have known what filing this audit would mean. Who it would land on. What it would start." "I did know. And you did it anyway." "I don't do things without a reason," she said. It came out more honest than she'd intended, which was not a sensation she was entirely comfortable with. "You deserved to know what was happening to your magic. Someone should have told you years ago." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said, and there was something in the word, not bitterness, not yet, but the specific weight of a thing you've suspected and finally had confirmed. "Yeah, they should have." He stood. Picked up his copy of the report and the document case. He was going to leave and she was going to let him, because he needed to sit with this before anything else, but at the door he turned. "Slytherin Common Room," he said. "Can you get a message to me without Dumbledore's monitoring hexes intercepting it?" He has them on inter-house communication, did you know that? She hadn't known that. She filed it without reacting. I know a method. Library owl system, books returned to the wrong section can carry messages between houses. It's a third-year trick, but it bypasses the standard monitoring because it runs through the castle's mail route as a library function. He almost smiled again. This time it made it further before catching itself. Of course you know that. He paused in the doorway. Thank you, Daphne. She nodded once. He left. She listened to his footsteps go down the entrance hall, steady, quick, not frantic, exactly the pace of a person moving towards something rather than away from it, and then she sat alone in the conference room with the pale November light until the sound was gone. Then she put her head in her hands for exactly 30 seconds, which was as long as she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she just set in motion. 94 spells. 15 years of slow bleeding. 7 active drains, running right now, this minute, pulling away at the magic of a 16-year-old boy who had already survived more than anyone ought to survive. And somewhere in this castle, in a circular office with a collection of silver instruments, Albus Dumbledore was sitting behind his desk entirely unaware that today, November 18th, was the day the ledger had finally been opened. She took her hands away from her face. She straightened. She picked up her bag. There was a great deal of work to do. Chapter 2, 94. Harry didn't go back to Gryffindor Tower. He thought about it, thought about climbing those stairs and sitting on his bed behind the curtains the way he used to do in second year when things got bad, the particular comfort of the enclosed space and the familiar smell of old wood and worn cotton. He thought about it and kept walking past the corridor that would have taken him there, because he knew, with a clarity that surprised him, that if he went up there now Ron would ask what was wrong and Harry would either lie or tell the truth, and he wasn't ready for either of those things. He needed to think first. He was very good at thinking in motion. The document case was under his arm. He was gripping it tighter than he meant to. He noticed his knuckles had gone white and made himself loosen his fingers, one at a time, the way Mad Eye had once told him to release a wand grip when you were tense. Tension makes you slow. Slow gets you killed. He hadn't thought of Moody, the real Moody, in a while. He thought of him now with a sudden, unexpected sharpness. He went to the 7th floor. Not to the room of requirement, not deliberately, but the room of requirement was where his feet took him anyway, as if the castle knew what he needed before he did. He walked past the stretch of blank wall 3 times, thinking clearly and precisely of a room where no one will interrupt me, and the door appeared, plain oak, no handle visible from the outside, the kind of door designed to be missed by someone who wasn't looking for it. Inside was a room he'd never seen the room produce before. Not the vast, cluttered treasure cave of his 6th-year defense sessions. Not the cool practice space of the DA. This was smaller, a single wide window looking out on the darkening grounds, a fire already lit and burning low, an armchair pulled close to it. A table with a lamp. Nothing else. He set the document case on the table and stood looking at it for a long moment. Then he sat down and opened it to page 1. He read all 30 pages. He read them without stopping, without looking up, with the specific focused attention that had always characterized how Harry moved through dangerous information, straight through the middle of it, eyes open, no flinching, because his experience had been that the things you flinched away from had a reliable habit of eating you from behind. He read the section on the binding spells and the section on the intentional suppressions and the section on the redirections. He read the technical analysis of each of the 7 Category 1 drains, their placement, their anchoring runes, their method of operation, the elegant, horrible precision of their design. He read the signature analysis on pages 26 through 28, 3 dense pages of goblin notation with an English summary at the bottom that he read very carefully, twice. He read the final page, which was a table. Sharpclaw had included a projected impact assessment, a goblin auditor's estimate of what Harry's magical development would have looked like without the 94 interferences. The figures were expressed in goblin units he couldn't parse completely, but the shape of it was clear enough. There were 2 lines on the graph. The lower one was labeled Actual Observed Magical Development, Restricted. The upper one was labeled Projected Natural Magical Development, Unimpeded. By the age of 11, the gap between the lines was already considerable. By 16, it was enormous. He closed the report. He sat very still in the armchair with the fire burning low beside him and the November dark pressing against the window and let himself feel it, finally, without the controlled stillness he'd maintained in the conference room. He let himself feel the full dimension of it, and it was a strange feeling, which he hadn't expected. He'd expected anger, and the anger was there, sitting heavy in his chest like a stone that had been there so long he'd stopped feeling its edges. But under the anger was something else, something rawer and harder to name. It was the feeling of a person who has spent years wondering why their hardest efforts produce results that never quite match the effort, years of working twice as hard as everyone around him and still feeling like he was behind, years of teachers saying remarkable, given your background and you have real talent, Harry, you just need to focus, the particular exhaustion of someone climbing a hill and being told they're slow, when the entire time someone has been quietly, carefully adding weight to their pack while they slept. It wasn't just anger. It was grief. He sat with it for a while. The fire crackled. The window turned from dark gray to full black. Somewhere far below, the castle went about the business of a Wednesday evening, dinner in the great hall, the distant sound of the grounds, the subtle ambient noise of several hundred magical people living in close proximity that Hogwarts always had as a background hum. He thought about Dumbledore. He had spent a great deal of his life carefully not thinking too hard about Dumbledore, in the same way he'd spent a great deal of his life carefully not thinking too hard about the Dursleys. It was a survival strategy. When you are dependent on something that is also hurting you, the mind builds walls around the hurt so you can keep functioning. He'd known this, somewhere. He hadn't known it with this kind of clarity. Dumbledore had a reason. Dumbledore always had a reason. The man was the most intelligent, most comprehensively strategically minded person Harry had ever encountered, and everything he did was in service of a plan so long and so carefully constructed that individual pieces of it looked like kindness or wisdom or protection when they were actually moves on a board. Harry had always known this, in the abstract. He'd felt it, the specific, uncomfortable feeling of being a piece rather than a player, but he'd never had evidence to point at. He had 30 pages of evidence now. The anger, held at bay for the last 3 hours, came forward. It came forward quietly, which was more frightening than if it had been loud. It was not the hot, immediate anger of a teenager, not the shaking hands and the raised voice and the impulse to throw something. It was the cold, quiet anger of a person who has absorbed the full picture and made a decision. It moved through him like cold water and he let it settle and he thought, no more. No more pretending he didn't see what he saw. No more carrying things because it was easier than asking why they were his to carry. No more performing the specific grateful bewilderment that everyone seemed to need from him, the Harry who can't quite believe his luck routine, the I just do my best shrug that made everyone comfortable because it kept him small. No more small. He stood up. The fire popped and flared, a brief, sudden surge of flame that had nothing to do with a shift in the wood, and he registered that distantly, the involuntary magical pressure of his own emotional state, and thought, that's going to get louder before it gets quieter. He picked up the document case and left. Ron was in the dormitory, predictably, and was engaged in the deeply Ron activity of eating biscuits and pretending to do homework. He looked up when Harry came in and said, "There you are," with the particular mix of casual and relieved that was Ron's version of "I was worried." Then he looked at Harry's face more closely and said, "What happened?" in a completely different tone. "I'll tell you and Hermione together," Harry said. "Can you get her up here? I know it's a boys' dormitory, use the extendable ear signal, she'll come." Ron stood up immediately, scattering biscuit crumbs, and went to the window. 4 minutes later Hermione appeared in the doorway with the slightly windswept look of someone who'd been moving fast and didn't mind it. She took one look at Harry and sat down on the nearest bed. Tell us, she said. So he told them. He told them straight through, the way he'd read the report, no preamble, no easing in, just the facts in sequence. Daphne Greengrass, the library, the audit, Sharpclaw, the conference room, 94. He watched Hermione's face as he talked, which was useful because Hermione's face processed information visibly. He could track what she was understanding in real time. Ron went very still about 2 minutes in, which was different from his usual restless physical energy and meant that what he was hearing had pushed everything else out. When Harry finished, nobody spoke for a moment. Then Ron said, in a voice so carefully controlled it sounded almost like a stranger's, "He's been draining your magic since you were a baby. 7 active drains since I was about 14 months old." 14, Ron stopped. Started again. Yeah. That's not protection, Hermione said. Her voice was quiet, but the quietness had a very specific quality, the same quality as Sharpclaw's containment, the sense of a great deal of pressure behind a held wall. That's not, the things he always says, keeping you safe, the blood wards, protecting you. If any part of that was real, none of this is consistent with protecting you. You cannot drain someone's magical core and claim you're protecting them. You cannot bind someone's dueling instincts and claim you're keeping them safe. She stopped. Keeping me manageable, Harry said. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Hermione closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had resolved in her expression, a decision made, a line crossed, an allegiance fully committed. What do you need? Legal help. Beyond what Sharpclaw gives me, I need to understand the wizarding law around this. The Goblin Wizard Accord authorizes the removal, but I need to understand what happens after. Whether there are criminal charges. Whether the Ministry would try to block it. Hermione was already mentally accessing the relevant filing system. He could see it happening. The Accord of 1752 grants Gringotts autonomous jurisdiction over magical audits and their remediation. The Ministry cannot legally interfere with the removal process once a subject has consented. But Dumbledore could contest it. He'd argue the bindings were necessary, that they were protective. Under Section 14 of the Magical Guardianship Act, a magical guardian of a minor has limited authority to place protective enchantments. I'm 16, Harry said. Not an infant. Most of these were placed when you were an infant. The question is whether they're legal to maintain at 16, not whether they were legal to place. And under the magical maturity provisions of 1799, a witch or wizard can petition for full magical rights at 16 with evidence of duress. She stopped. Her eyes went wide. Harry. 30 pages of documented illegal magical interference by your magical guardian constitutes evidence of duress. You could petition for full magical emancipation. Ron looked between them. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning Dumbledore would have no legal standing over any aspect of Harry's magical life. Hermione said it quickly, the way she said things when she was ahead of herself and trying to keep up with her own brain. The blood wards would lose their anchor. The guardianship terms would dissolve. He would have no institutional authority over Harry's choices, not his school attendance, not his Gringotts access, not his living arrangements, the Dursleys, Harry said. Not emotionally. Just as a fact. Hermione stopped talking. Looking at him with something that was not quite pity but was close to it, weighted with the years of knowing him and knowing exactly what those 2 words meant. Yeah, Harry said again. So. I need help building a case, not just getting the spells removed. He looked at both of them. And I need Sirius. Sirius was not technically permitted to be in contact with Hogwarts. The official story, the story that existed in Ministry records and Dumbledore's correspondence, was that Sirius Black was in hiding, location unknown, communicating only through Dumbledore via encrypted flow. The actual story was that Sirius was in a safe house in Edinburgh, had been there since the beginning of the school year, and maintained a private encrypted mirror with Harry that Dumbledore didn't know about because Harry had set it up himself using a method he'd found in a book on goblin ward-adjacent magic from the restricted section 2 years ago. The mirror was the size of a playing card, spelled to look like a regular pocket mirror, and Harry had kept it in the lining of his school bag since September. He took it out now, sat on the floor against the side of his bed, and activated it. The mirror went silver bright for 3 seconds and then Sirius's face appeared, dark, expressive, currently the face of someone who had been asleep and wasn't for much longer. "Harry? What time is it?" "Nearly midnight." "Sirius. I need to tell you something." Sirius sat up. His hair was everywhere. He'd been growing it back out and it was at the stage where it didn't know what to do with itself, which was extremely appropriate for Sirius. But his eyes were sharp the second Harry said, "I need to tell you something," in that tone, the sharpness that came online whenever Harry was in trouble, the specific pad-foot attention that was one of the truest things about him. "Tell me." Harry told him. This telling was different. With Ron and Hermione he'd been precise, informational, because that's what they needed. With Sirius he just talked, let the shape of the day come out in the order he'd lived it, Daphne in the alcove and the conference room and the document case and Sharpclaw's 30 pages, reading it alone in the room of requirement, the projected development chart with the 2 lines. He talked and Sirius listened, and as Harry talked, Sirius's face moved through a series of expressions that had nothing careful about them: shock, fury, grief, the particular look of someone receiving confirmation of something they'd suspected and been too afraid to fully believe. When Harry finished, Sirius's jaw was tight and his eyes were very bright and he was doing a thing with his hands, pressing them together, releasing, pressing, that Harry had come to recognize as Sirius managing the impulse to do something immediate and physical. 14 months, Sirius said. After Lily and James, his voice roughened. After everything that happened to you, when you were 14 months old, someone stood over you and put 7 active drains on your... He stopped. Collected himself. And the signature matches. Sharpclaw's team is 99.7% confident. You know what the 0.3% is? Sirius said. That's the margin they leave for the theoretical possibility that someone else in history has ever produced a magical signature this specific. They're certain, Harry. They're just too professional to write 100%. His eyes met Harry's through the mirror. What do you need from me? I need you in person. I know that's complicated, I know the risk, tell me where. Harry blinked. I haven't finished explaining why, you're my godson. Someone's been hurting you since you were a baby. Tell me where. Hogsmeade, Harry said. Saturday. The Shrieking Shack Passage. Can you get there by 7 in the morning, before the visit crowds? I'll be there by 6. Harry breathed out. Sirius. I'm okay. I know you are. Sirius looked at him through the small silver surface, looked at him the way he always did, the way James must have looked at Sirius when something was truly wrong, that combination of love and fury and terrible pride. That's almost the hardest part, you know. That you're okay. You've gotten so good at being okay. Harry didn't have anything to say to that. He nodded once, and Sirius nodded back, and the mirror went dark. Thursday was a performance. Harry was good at performing normality, he'd been doing it since he was 5 years old, performing normal for the Dursleys, performing slightly weird but harmless for primary school teachers, performing capable and fine for an entire magical world that needed him to be the symbol it had decided he was. He was very, very good at it. He performed it through History of Magic and through Lunch and through Potions, where Snape watched him with the sharp discomfort of someone who had noticed something was different but couldn't identify what, and where Harry met Snape's gaze with a directness that made the Potions master's eyes narrow. He performed it through the afternoon and through dinner. He performed it, and nobody noticed the gaps. Except one person. He saw Daphne Greengrass across the great hall at dinner, at the Slytherin table, eating with the elegant efficiency that characterized everything she did, and for a moment their eyes met across the room. She didn't smile. He didn't either. But she gave him a very slight nod, the specific nod of someone checking in without drawing attention, and he returned it, and that was enough. It occurred to him, over dessert, that he trusted her. That was strange. He hadn't trusted someone this quickly since Sirius, actually, which hadn't been the most rational trust he'd ever extended either, but had turned out to be the truest. He thought about the directness of her in the alcove, the way she hadn't sugar-coated it, hadn't performed sympathy, had just given him the facts and let him decide what to do with them. He thought about I'm good at noticing things that aren't right, and you've been carrying something that wasn't right for a very long time. It bothered me. Not I wanted to help you or I thought it was unjust. It bothered me. The simplest and most honest version of it. He decided that he would trust her until she gave him a reason not to. That was the only kind of trust he'd ever been able to manage, provisional, evidence-based, updated continuously. So far the evidence was strong. He found her library book return message system in the library at 8 o'clock that evening, because of course he did. It had taken him about 4 minutes to work out the method from her description, and the message she'd tucked into the pages of a transfiguration text that had been filed 2 shelves out of place simply read, "Sirius. He needs to know. Can you reach him?" He tucked his response into the same book, reshuffled it 3 shelves in the wrong direction, and wrote, "Already done. Hogsmeade Saturday, 6 a.m., Shrieking Shack Passage. Bring Sharpclaw if he'll come." He was back in the tower by 9. Friday hit like a controlled detonation. Not because anything public happened. The day was, on its surface, entirely ordinary. Classes, meals, the normal social architecture of Hogwarts in mid-November. Dumbledore appeared at breakfast looking precisely as he always looked, ancient, benevolent, twinkly-eyed, moving through the hall with the unhurried authority of someone who owned the room without needing to declare it. He exchanged words with McGonagall at the staff table. Harry watched him and felt the cold water anger settle in his chest and stayed very still with it. McGonagall looked at Harry once, across the hall, and then looked away. Her copy of the 30-page report was presumably in her quarters. He wondered what she had done with the night between reading it and this breakfast. The controlled detonation happened at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, in a side room at Gringotts, which Harry had reached via a short-notice permission slip, ostensibly for vault access, which McGonagall had signed without asking any questions and with the particular grim efficiency of someone who had decided to be useful. The removal room at Gringotts was nothing like he'd expected. He'd anticipated something clinical, a healer's room, maybe, white stone and medical instruments. What Sharpclaw showed him to was an old, deep room in the lower levels of the bank, circular, with walls that were entirely covered in carved goblin runes that pulsed faintly with amber light. The floor was warm stone. There were 3 goblin assessors besides Sharpclaw, each introduced precisely by name, Grimfong, Stonecrest, and Vaultkeeper Mira, the only female goblin Harry had ever encountered and the one who looked, of the 3, most like a person who had been waiting for this specific task for a very long time. "We will begin with the 7 active drains," Sharpclaw said. "They are the priority and the most deeply anchored. You will feel the removal. I want you to expect this. It will not be painful, but it may be intense." Harry sat in the chair they indicated, plain, straight-backed, positioned in the center of the runed circle. "How intense?" Sharpclaw and Vaultkeeper Mira exchanged the very slight look of 2 professionals calibrating how honest to be. For a standard tier core, the removal of a single active drain produces a noticeable but manageable sensation. For an Omega tier core that has been restricted for 15 years, Mira said. Her voice was clear and precise, accented with the particular cadences of goblin speech. "Mr. Potter, you should understand that when the drains are lifted, your core will reassert itself. The analogy I would use is a river that has been dammed for 15 years and then the dam is removed. There will be a surge." "How big a surge?" "We have taken precautions." She indicated the rune walls. "The chamber is sealed and warded. Nothing will escape these walls. But inside these walls, she glanced at the ceiling, which was 20 feet above them. "You may want to brace." Harry almost said "I've faced worse" and then didn't, because it wasn't relevant and because he had learned, fairly recently, that being casually dismissive of things people were actively trying to warn him about was the kind of habit that occasionally got him killed. "Right," he said. "Do it." The 4 goblins took positions around the circle. They produced no wands. Goblin magic was different, older, worked through the hands and through voice in a register too low to fully hear, felt more in the chest than the ears. They began. The first drain was removed at 2:14 in the afternoon. He knew the exact moment it happened because it felt like a window being thrown open in a room that had been sealed for years, an enormous, involuntary rush of something, of presence and air and energy, and every single carved rune on every single wall lit up simultaneously, brilliant amber shifting to white, and the stone floor under his feet vibrated with a deep, subsonic note. Sharpclaw said, "1," in the same tone a surgeon confirms a procedure. The second removal was stronger. The stone floor cracked, a single clean line running from the circle's edge to the nearest wall, and Harry felt it, the magic coming back into him, rushing in to fill spaces he hadn't known were empty, like water filling the hollows in a dry streambed. His hands, flat on the arms of the chair, were surrounded by a fine, involuntary corona of gold-white light. By the time they reached the 5th drain, the ceiling was vibrating. 5, Sharpclaw said. His voice was completely steady. One of the wall runes had gone dark, burned out, Mira noted without apparent concern, saying it happened, they'd expected it. The light in the room had shifted from amber white to a deep, warm gold that was coming primarily from Harry. The 6th drain went and Harry made a sound, not pain. He'd told himself it wouldn't be pain and it wasn't, but it was, immense, the only word for it, the sensation of 15 years of compressed possibility suddenly having room to exist. His vision went gold-white for a moment, completely, just gold-white and the distant sound of the runes and the deep subsonic note of the stone under him. 6, Sharpclaw said. The 7th was the oldest. The first one placed, Harry knew from the report, within hours of Voldemort's disappearance, when Harry had been in St. Mungo's with magical exhaustion and a 7-month-old's inability to resist anything. The most deeply anchored, the most tightly wound into the fabric of his core. Sharpclaw had warned him this one would take longer. It took 6 minutes. He felt every second of it, a slow, deliberate unwinding, layer by layer, each layer releasing another wave of warm gold energy into the room. By the 3rd layer the light in the chamber was so bright the goblin runes were invisible inside it. By the 5th layer the chair he was sitting on began to crack along its joints, not violently, just quietly, under the weight of a magical current it had not been designed to manage. By the final layer, Harry was not thinking in words. He was just feeling, expansive and vast and incandescently present, in the way that things feel present when they finally exist in their full dimensions for the first time. 7, Sharpclaw said. The light faded over approximately 2 minutes, gradually, the way a fire banks down rather than the way a candle is blown out. When Harry's vision cleared, the chamber looked like it had been through a windstorm, not damaged, but profoundly disturbed, runes reoriented, the floor crack had branched into 3, one section of the ceiling had shed its outer stone layer and was showing the raw dark rock beneath. The chair was in pieces. He was sitting, technically, on the floor. He looked at his hands. The faint gold corona was still there, much softer now, barely visible, just a warmth around the edges of his fingers, like the last light of a sunset. He felt enormous. Not in ego, not in grandiosity. Just enormous the way the world is enormous when you walk outside after a long time indoors. Like the dimensions of things had expanded. Mira was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. Sharpclaw was making notes in his precise goblin script. Grimfong and Stonecrest were examining the rune walls with what appeared to be professional interest and something that might, in a goblin, pass for awe. "How do you feel?" Sharpclaw asked, still writing. Harry considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Bigger," he said. Sharpclaw looked up. Something moved in his face that was absolutely, definitely satisfaction, held on the tightest possible professional leash. "The remaining 87 interferences will be addressed in 2 further sessions," he said. "When those are complete, your full magical access should be," he paused, seeming to choose his word with care, "restored." "What I have right now," Harry said, looking at his hands. "Is this a fraction of what, with the 7 drains removed, you currently have access to approximately 38% of your natural magical capacity?" Sharpclaw said it the way you say something true that is almost too much to say. "Yes." Harry absorbed that. 38%, and the room around him looked like the aftermath of something. He thought about what 47 remaining binding spells sat on top of that 38%. He thought about what the full picture looked like. He stood up, and his legs were steady, and he picked up his coat, and he looked at Sharpclaw and said, "Thank you." "Come back next Friday," Sharpclaw said. "We'll continue." He felt it walking back through the Gringotts corridors. Not loudly, not the obvious, showy magical pressure that he'd felt in the chamber. But present. Like a hum at a frequency the world could hear now. The marble floors reflected his footsteps differently. The golden light of the chandeliers above the main banking hall seemed slightly warmer in his vicinity. A goblin teller 3 windows down looked up from his work for no apparent reason as Harry passed, and then looked back down. The evening air outside Gringotts was cold and sharp, and he stood on the top step for a moment, breathing it, feeling the November dark settle around him with a new, strange quality. Like the dark fit him differently. Like he had more edges to fit it against. Then he straightened, tucked the document case under his arm, and walked back toward the Hogwarts carriage with the particular purposeful ease of someone who had not yet done the thing they came to do, and was not afraid of it. He passed through the castle gates at 6:30, in time for the tail end of dinner. The great hall was warm and loud in the way it got on Friday evenings when the week had broken and everyone was relaxed. He walked to the Gryffindor table, sat down, accepted the plate that appeared in front of him, and began to eat. He was 5 minutes into dinner when he felt it, the familiar, specific sensation of Dumbledore's attention. Not dramatic, not visible to anyone else. Just the faint pressure of the most powerful legilimens in Britain sliding a casual, habitual probe along the surface of the room. He'd felt it 100 times and not known what it was. He knew now. He raised his eyes to the staff table. Dumbledore was looking at him with the gentle, benevolent, slightly absent expression he wore like a costume. His half-moon spectacles caught the candlelight. His long fingers were folded on the table. He looked, as always, like the embodiment of wise, warm authority, the grandfather of the wizarding world, the greatest wizard of his age, the architect of everything. Harry held his gaze for 3 full seconds without looking away. Without performing anything. Without the slight, reflexive deference he had always unconsciously offered. Dumbledore's expression didn't change. But his fingers, folded on the table, tightened almost imperceptibly. He had felt it, the difference in Harry's magical presence. The way it sat in the room now. The way it reflected his probe back instead of absorbing it. Harry picked up his fork and went back to eating. He did not feel triumphant. He felt clear. Absolutely, crystallinely clear, in the way you feel after the weather finally breaks and the air is clean again and you can see all the way to the horizon. Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Daphne was looking at him with the careful, assessing attention he had come to associate with her, not staring, just watching in the way a person watches when they're reading something. He met her eyes, and she would have seen something in his face, because something moved in hers in response, a very slight adjustment, a recalibration, a recognition. He gave her the same small nod she'd given him the day before. She gave it back. Then turned to say something to the dark-haired boy beside her, Zabini, and Zabini's eyes moved briefly to Harry and then back to Daphne with an expression Harry couldn't fully read from this distance but that he suspected was the goblin auditor equivalent in human form, assessment concluding in something like respect. Harry finished his dinner. The fire in the great hall burned warm and gold. Outside the tall windows, the first snow of winter was beginning to fall over the Hogwarts grounds, light, early, not yet settling, just drifting down through the dark in the easy, uncommitted way of snow that has all the time in the world. Tomorrow, Sirius. Tomorrow, the shrieking shack, and the beginning of figuring out what came next. Tonight, he let himself simply exist in the new, vast, slightly terrifying dimensions of himself, and found, cautiously, provisionally, without flourish, that he didn't mind them at all. Chapter 3. The War Room. The shrieking shack at 6 in the morning was exactly as unpleasant as it had always been, which was to say, cold, dark, smelling of old wood and older magic, and possessed of the specific atmospheric quality of a place that had been deliberately frightened into a reputation it didn't entirely deserve. Harry had stopped finding it sinister around 4th year. Now it just felt like a room that had been waiting for something useful to do. Sirius was already there. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall furthest from the boarded window, a conjured mug of something hot in both hands, wearing muggle clothes that looked like he'd been sleeping in them, which, knowing Sirius, he probably had. He looked up the moment Harry came through the passage and his face did the thing it always did, that rapid, involuntary calculation of is he hurt, is he whole that Harry had come to recognize as the closest thing to parental instinct Sirius had. Then his expression shifted. He looked at Harry the way Sharpclaw had looked at the wall runes after the 7th drain, like someone recalibrating their measurements. "You're different," Sirius said. 7 drains removed. Harry sat down on the floor across from him. "Yesterday." Sirius stared at him for a moment longer. "I can feel it. From here." "That's, Harry, I could always feel your magic, you know, godfathers have a bond, it's an old magic, and it always felt like hearing music through a wall. Muffled. And now? Sirius laughed, short and disbelieving and fierce. "Now it's like the wall came down." Harry almost smiled. That's roughly how it felt. Footsteps from behind him, Daphne and Blaise came through the passage, Daphne first, pulling her coat straight as she emerged, Blaise just behind her with the expression of someone who had agreed to a 6 a.m. meeting under protest and was processing this protest by being impeccably dressed. His coat had a collar that would have been at home on a fashion illustration. Harry noted this without comment because there were more important things, but he filed it anyway. Daphne looked at Sirius, then at Harry, then back at Sirius. "Sirius Black," she said. It wasn't a greeting exactly. It was an acknowledgement, the naming of something confirmed. "Daphne Greengrass," Sirius said. "You're the one who filed the audit." "I am." "Good." He said it with complete simplicity. No qualifications, no Gryffindor suspicion about Slytherins, none of the house divide friction that Harry had half expected. Just good, delivered with the conviction of someone who had been waiting for anyone to do what she'd done and was grateful it had finally happened. He looked at Blaise. "And you're here under duress," Blaise said pleasantly, sitting down on the least dusty available surface with elegant economy of motion. "Also here because Daphne is occasionally right about things and I've learned to show up when she is." Sirius almost smiled. "Reasonable." He looked at Harry. "Who else knows?" "Ron, Hermione. McGonagall has a copy of the report." Harry paused. "That's the full list right now." "McGonagall." Sirius's expression shifted, something complicated crossing his face, the old history between Sirius Black and Hogwarts staff working itself out in real time. "How did she take it?" "She asked for a copy and then didn't say anything." "That's worse than if she'd shouted," Sirius said, with the confidence of someone who knew Minerva McGonagall well enough to read her silences. "That means she's doing something." Daphne pulled a folded sheaf of parchment from her coat pocket and spread it flat on the floor between them. It was covered in her precise vertical handwriting, columns, references, what appeared to be a legal framework organized with the same careful structure as a Gringotts audit but human-authored. Harry leaned forward. "I spent Thursday night on this," she said. "Legal architecture, specifically. What we have, what we need, and what has to happen in what order." She touched the first column. "What we have, a Gringotts magical inheritance audit with 94 findings, legally binding under the Accord of 1752, admissible in the Wisengamot under Statute of Magical Evidence Article 7, which accepts goblin documentation as primary source material. Sharpclaw's team has formal standing. They can submit directly." "Without going through the ministry?" Harry asked. "Without going through the ministry. That's the crucial part. Dumbledore has significant ministry influence, not control, but influence. If we had to build this case through ministry channels, he could slow it, redirect it, bury it in procedure for years. Goblin legal pathways bypass the ministry's administrative system entirely and go straight to the Wisengamot, which is a separate body." She touched the second column. "What we need, a formal petitioner. I filed the audit as an interested party, but for the Wisengamot proceeding, the primary petitioner should be Harry. He needs to petition as a victim of documented magical assault. That's the legal classification Sharpclaw's Category 1 findings fall under." "I'm 16, Harry said. "I'm a minor." "Which is where this gets interesting." She looked at him directly. "You can petition for magical emancipation under the maturity provisions of 1799. Hermione mentioned this. She reached the same conclusion I did from the statute. With 30 pages of documented abuse by your magical guardian as evidence of duress, the emancipation petition has strong grounds. And there's a precedent." She flipped to the third page of her notes. "Barsden vs. the Ministry of Magic, 1934. A 15-year-old petitioned for emancipation on the grounds that his magical guardian had illegally redirected his inheritance. The Wisengamot granted it in 37 days. 37 days, Sirius said. It can go faster. The 1934 case didn't have goblin audit documentation. It relied on ministry assessors, who are slower and can be influenced." She looked up. "We have Sharpclaw." Sirius leaned back against the wall, looking at the ceiling for a moment. Harry recognized the expression, Sirius processing a complex tactical picture, running it forward, checking for gaps. It was the same thing he did at chess with Ron, except the stakes were considerably higher. "Walk me through the order of operations," Sirius said. "Second removal session next Friday, the remaining bindings come off in 2 sessions total. The more magic Harry has access to before the Wisengamot hearing, the more the physical evidence supports the audit findings. His magical presence is itself evidence that something was being suppressed." She touched the fourth column. "In the meantime, we build the case document. Sharpclaw's full report, Harry's emancipation petition, a statement of harm, which I'll draft unless Harry wants to draft it," Harry said. "You're better at the language." Something moved across her face, brief, almost invisible, gone before it was fully there. She nodded and moved on. "We need one more thing. A Wisengamot advocate. Someone with standing to present the case formally, because Harry can't present his own case as a minor, even with an emancipation petition in process." Silence. Sirius straightened. "I have standing. I'm his godfather, I have full legal recognition of that status under Gringotts records even if the ministry's been dragging their feet on the official restoration, and he stopped. Smiled grimly. "I've been wanting to be in the same room as Dumbledore for about 2 years. "You're in hiding," Blaise said, from his corner. Not objecting. Noting. "I was in hiding. Things change." Sirius looked at Harry. "This is what I'm for. Presenting your case in the Wisengamot, fighting for you in a room full of people who think they own the future. This is exactly what I'm for." Harry looked at him. "It puts you at risk." "Everything puts me at risk. I'd rather be at risk doing something." He held Harry's gaze. "Let me." Harry thought about it for exactly the amount of time the question actually required, which was not very long. "Okay. Yes." Daphne was already writing Sirius's name in the advocate column of her notes. "There's a timing problem," she said, without looking up. "Dumbledore is going to notice that something's happening before we're ready." He already has. Harry's magical presence changed after the first removal session. By the time the second and third sessions are complete, the change will be unmissable. He'll move to contain it. "What does that look like when Dumbledore moves to contain something?" Blaise asked. He'd been listening with the still, focused attention of someone gathering information rather than contributing, which was, Harry was beginning to understand, Blaise's primary mode of operating in novel situations. "It looks like a quiet conversation," Sirius said. "That's his method. Private meetings, gentle persuasion, the full force of that personality in a room with you one-on-one. He'll come to Harry and he'll explain and he'll justify and he'll make it sound reasonable." His jaw tightened. "He's extraordinarily good at making things that aren't reasonable sound like wisdom." "What do we do when he does that?" Harry said. "You don't meet with him alone." Sirius said it without hesitation. "Not once, not ever, until this is resolved. If he requests a meeting, you request that a third party be present. He can't legally refuse that. There's a student rights provision, Article 4 of the Hogwarts Student Charter, right to a witness in any formal meeting with staff." "I know that provision," Daphne said. She looked at Harry. "I'll be your third party if you want one." "You'd walk into a meeting with Dumbledore on my behalf," Harry said. He wasn't questioning it, exactly. He was acknowledging what it meant. "I've been walking into difficult rooms since I was 6, she said. It was stated as fact, not as complaint, not as performance of toughness. Just the simple, unvarnished truth of someone who'd grown up in a pure-blood political family and learned early that difficult rooms were simply rooms that required preparation. I'm not afraid of him. He's the most powerful wizard in, he's a person," she said, with a precision that cut the sentence cleanly in half. "A very powerful, very intelligent person who has spent so long believing he's the most necessary person in the room that he's stopped accounting for the possibility that he's wrong. That's a vulnerability." She met Harry's eyes. "We can work with that." Blaise, in his corner, made a sound that was not quite a laugh but contained the essence of one. Sirius looked at Daphne Greengrass with the expression of someone making a significant upward revision to a prior assessment. "You know," he said, "I spent 7 years being told Slytherins weren't to be trusted." "And," she said. "And I've spent the last 2 years hiding from a system that was never built to protect people like me." He leaned forward. "What do we need to do first?" They worked for 3 hours. By the time the Hogsmeade village bells rang 9 and the first Hogwarts students began filtering down for the Saturday visit, the Shrieking Shack floor was covered in parchment, Daphne's organized columns, Sirius's addenda in a loose, energetic scrawl that covered every available margin, a timeline Blaise had constructed on a clean sheet with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to seeing complex situations as sequences rather than single events. The timeline read like a battle plan. Week 1. Second removal session. Finalize Harry's emancipation petition. Daphne drafts statement of harm. Sirius contacts his own legal advocate. He had one, a wizard named Croaker who worked in the Department of Mysteries and owed Sirius a favor of the size that doesn't get discussed at dinner, about formalizing his Wisengamot standing. Week 2, third removal session. File the emancipation petition through Gringotts rather than the ministry. There was a provision, Daphne had found it at 2 a.m. on Thursday, a provision in the 1799 maturity statute that allowed the petition to be filed through any recognized magical authority, and Gringotts qualified. This bypassed Dumbledore entirely. Week 3, Sharpclaw files the audit findings formally with the Wiesengemot. The hearing would be scheduled. Standard timeline suggested 2 to 3 weeks after filing, but with Category 1 assault findings, Daphne believed they could argue for emergency scheduling under the Magical Persons Protection Act of 1857. "He'll know by then," Harry said. He was sitting with his back against the wall opposite Sirius, a mug of something warm that Blaze had produced from somewhere, Harry hadn't asked where, cooling between his hands. "He'll have known for a while by then." "Yes," Daphne said. "He'll try to get ahead of it. Which is why we move faster than he can manage." She didn't look up from the timeline. "Dumbledore's strength is patience. He's been playing a long game for decades. He doesn't operate well when forced to react in compressed time. We give him no runway." "You've thought about this," Harry said. She looked up then. "I've been thinking about Dumbledore's methodology since 3rd year," she said. "The way he constructs situations. The way information is controlled in this school. The way certain things never get questioned because he's made himself so foundational to everyone's sense of safety that questioning him feels like dismantling the foundation." She paused. "He's not doing it out of cruelty. That's the thing. He genuinely believes he's right. And people who believe they're doing right are much harder to stop than people who know they're doing wrong, because they don't look over their shoulder." Sirius said, quietly, "That's the most accurate thing I've ever heard said about him." "My mother said something similar about my father once," Daphne said, and then looked back down at the timeline as if she hadn't said it, and Harry let it pass, because he'd learned in the last few days that Daphne Greengrass operated on a principle of voluntary disclosure. She gave you information when she was ready, and pushing before she was ready produced nothing. "Right." Sirius clapped his hands together in the decisive way he had, the way that meant this is a plan, we have a plan, we are moving. Priorities. "Harry, when you're back in the castle, I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Find out what monitoring Dumbledore has on your mail, your movements, and your communications. Specifically." He held up a hand before Harry could respond. "I know about the interhouse monitoring hexes," Daphne mentioned it. "But what else? Think about times when he seemed to know things he shouldn't have known." Harry thought. "The mirror I used to contact you. I built it myself, Goblin Ward method, he shouldn't be able to monitor it." "Good. Keep using it." Sirius looked at Daphne. "Can you check the castle wards through any of your family contacts? Your father sits on the Board of Governors." A slight pause. "He does. Board of Governors has oversight of Hogwarts security provisions, which means access to the ward schema. If there's a monitoring structure embedded in the castle wards, it would be visible in the schema. I'll write to him." She said it without particular emotion, and Harry noted again the quality of that pause and filed it. "I'll contact Croker today," Sirius said. "I need to do it in person, which means I stay in Edinburgh one more night. I can be back in Hogsmeade by Sunday if needed." He looked at Harry. "You're okay?" "You keep saying that like it's a question," Harry said. "Because I keep needing to confirm it." Sirius stood, stretched, a full-body stretch that was somehow more animal than human, the animagus form still visible in the way he moved, and looked at his godson with the particular fierce, unguarded love that he'd never bothered to hide, which had always undone Harry slightly because nobody else had ever looked at him quite that way. "You're sure about all of this? Because once we file, there's no taking it back." Harry stood too. He was slightly taller than Sirius, he noticed, not for the first time. At some point in the last year he had grown past the uncertain, slightly too thin boy he'd been at the start of secondary school and become someone whose physical presence had caught up to whatever his magic had always been trying to be. He thought about Sharpclaw's chart. The 2 lines. "I want my magic back," he said. "I want the truth on record. I want Dumbledore to have to stand in a room and explain himself to people who aren't predisposed to believe him." He paused. And I want to know who else he's done this to. Because I don't think I'm the only one. Sirius looked at him. I don't think you are either. Then yes, Harry said. I'm sure. Hermione was in the library when Harry got back to the castle, which was where Hermione generally was on Saturday mornings, particularly Saturday mornings when she was working through something that needed more space than her head could comfortably contain. She had 3 books open simultaneously and a parchment full of dense, underlined notes and an expression of someone who had been wrestling with a problem and had got it mostly pinned. She looked up when he sat down across from her. Sirius? Good. He's on board. He's going to be the Wizengamot advocate. Hermione breathed out. Good. Yes, that's right. She turned her parchment toward him. I've been doing legal research. The Bar's Den precedent, you'll have seen it in Daphne's notes, I have. There's another one. Less well known. Finch vs. Finch, 1967, an adult child petitioned retroactively for recognition of magical harm done during their minority. The Wizengamot not only granted the petition but awarded reparative recognition. It's not financial damages, it's more like a formal acknowledgement, a restoration of what was taken in the magical record. It sets a precedent for the record itself to be corrected. She tapped the relevant entry. If we can get that added to your case, Harry, the formal record of your magical development, the ministry record that shows you as a middling student in some areas, that shows the results of your suppressed abilities, that record would be sealed and replaced with an asterisk notation indicating that the results were produced under illegal interference. Harry looked at the entry. Does it matter? The record? It matters for a lot of things. Apprenticeship applications. Professional licensing. When you leave Hogwarts and try to do anything formally in the magical world, your school record follows you. The suppressed record follows you. She looked at him seriously. You're going to want the corrected version. All right. Add it to the case. She wrote something. Also, and tell me if this is too much, Hermione. I know, just say it. She looked up. I think we should document every instance of Dumbledore's intervention in your life that might be recontextualized in light of the audit findings. Every time he gave you information, or withheld it, or positioned you in a certain way. Because the audit proves the magical interference, but the Wizengamot is going to want to understand the pattern of behavior. Why 94 spells? What they were collectively achieving. She paused. It's going to mean going back through some things you might not want to revisit. Harry was quiet for a moment. The library moved around them, the quiet, purposeful movement of Saturday students, the distant sound of the restricted sections chains settling, the particular muffled quality of a room full of books. I know what it was collectively achieving, he said. Sharpclaw laid it out. They were keeping me manageable. Keeping my power low enough that I was effective as a symbol and as a weapon but not powerful enough to make my own choices about how to use it. He said it evenly. They were keeping me ready to die on command. The silence that followed was not comfortable. He hadn't meant it to be. Then the Wizengamot needs to hear that clearly, Hermione said, and her voice was very steady and very fierce and very much the voice of the person who had been his best friend for 5 years. And they will. The first crack in Dumbledore's containment happened Sunday evening. Harry was heading back from the Ollery. He'd sent a letter to Sirius via the Gringotts bird relay, which routed through the bank rather than the castle post and was therefore outside Hogwarts monitoring, when he turned a corner on the 4th floor and walked directly into Dumbledore. Not literally. Dumbledore was standing in the corridor, which was otherwise empty, with the slightly expectant air of someone who had positioned himself there rather than arrived there coincidentally. He was wearing deep blue robes and his half-moon spectacles and the expression of warm, benevolent attention that Harry had once found so reassuring and now found, he searched for the right word, legible. It was legible. Like reading a familiar text and suddenly understanding which parts of it were constructed. Harry, Dumbledore said warmly. A fortunate encounter. I was hoping to speak with you. Harry stopped approximately 8 feet away. Not aggressive distance, just the distance of someone who had not closed it, which was its own message. Hello, Professor. I wondered if you might come up to my office this evening. I have some thoughts I'd like to share with you about your upcoming, well, about several things, in fact. Some matters that I think would benefit from a private conversation. Harry looked at him. Dumbledore looked back, and his expression was warm and kind and entirely confident in the fundamental dynamic between them, the wise elder, the willing student, that had defined every conversation they'd ever had. Harry could feel the pressure of it. Could feel the invisible hand of the situation trying to slot him back into the shape he'd always occupied in these moments. He didn't slot. I'd prefer to have a third party present, Harry said. Article 4 of the Student Charter. My right to a witness in any formal meeting with staff. A very brief pause. Not long enough for most people to catch. Of course, Dumbledore said, and his voice was just as warm as before, the adjustment seamless. Is there someone specific you'd like to have with you? Daphne Greengrass. This pause was fractionally longer. Something moved in the blue eyes behind the spectacles, not anger, nothing as simple as anger. Calculation. Recalibration. The rapid, experienced adjustment of a strategist who has encountered an unexpected variable and is already incorporating it. An interesting choice, he said pleasantly. She's a capable person, Harry said. Indeed she is. Dumbledore smiled. Shall we say tomorrow evening? 8 o'clock? That works, Harry said. I'll let her know. Wonderful. Dumbledore inclined his head with the gracious ease of someone entirely untroubled. He turned to go, then paused, the classic Columbo method, which Harry had read about in a Muggle detective novel Hermione had lent him and which he now identified the moment it started. Just one more thing. Harry. I do want you to know that I am aware that some recent events may have raised questions for you. I hope you know that everything I have ever done has been out of care for you and for the world you will one day help protect. Harry held the headmaster's gaze. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about tomorrow, he said. And walked away. He did not look back. He heard nothing behind him, no footsteps, which meant Dumbledore was standing still in the corridor, and he chose not to know for how long. He sent Daphne the library book signal as soon as he reached the 5th floor. The message was brief, tomorrow. 8 p.m. Dumbledore's office. He's invited us. Don't change anything about how you've been acting. Come ready. Her reply came 40 minutes later, tucked into the wrong section of the charms reference shelf, already ready. What tipped him off? He thought about the 4th floor corridor. About Dumbledore's eyes behind the spectacles. About the fractional pause when Harry said her name. He wrote back, my magic changed. He felt it Friday at dinner. He's been sitting with it all weekend. A longer wait. Then, good. He's working with incomplete information and reacting on a timeline we chose. That's exactly where we want him. Harry stood in the empty section of the library stacks with the small slip of parchment in his hand and felt something he recognized belatedly as gratitude, not the generic gratitude of someone receiving help, but the specific, grounded gratitude of someone who has found, in an entirely unexpected place, a person whose mind works in a way that makes them genuinely better equipped to navigate the situation at hand. He pocketed the note and went to find Hermione to brief her. Monday arrived without ceremony. Breakfast was normal. Dumbledore was at the staff table, unhurried, reading a letter over his porridge. Snape was present and watchful in the particular manner he'd been watchful since Friday. There was a link between Snape and Dumbledore's information network that Harry was increasingly aware of, the two of them in alignment in ways that weren't always visible, and Snape had noticed the change in Harry's magic too, he was almost sure of it. Snape's legilimency was nowhere near Dumbledore's caliber, but it was functional and frequently used, and when Harry met his eyes over the table he kept his surface thoughts neutral and watched Snape's micro-expression flicker with the minor frustration of a probe that found nothing useful. McGonagall was there, upright and precise, eating toast with the focused attention of a woman doing a very good impression of a woman not thinking about anything in particular. Harry ate breakfast and went to class and was, for the 7th year running, exactly as normal as he needed to be. Daphne found him in the corridor between Transfiguration and lunch, not in a way that looked like a meeting, just falling into step beside him as their classes happened to empty into the same 4th-floor corridor, which was not a coincidence, he suspected, but looked like one from the outside. "Ground rules for tonight," she said, not looking at him, maintaining the rhythm of two people walking in the same direction without apparent conversation. "Don't answer anything directly that you haven't already decided to disclose. He's going to probe, not legilimency, he won't do that with me present, he'll probe verbally, looking for your emotional reaction to specific subjects. If he mentions the audit, don't confirm what you know. Let him show his hand first. You think he'll bring it up directly? No. Which is why we need to pay attention to what he circles rather than what he says." She adjusted her bag strap. "His primary goal tonight is to establish whether you're going to act on what you know. He wants to assess the threat level. Give him nothing to assess. Just be Harry. Be the version of Harry he's used to. Attentive. A little uncertain. Present but not aggressive." "I can do that," he said. "I know you can." A fractional pause. "The version of Harry he's used to has also never had a Slytherin in the room with him for a Dumbledore meeting. So he'll be recalibrating throughout. Don't worry about me, I'll handle myself. Just let him talk." They reached the staircase that diverged toward their respective lunch routes. She angled away without breaking stride. "Daphne," he said. She looked back. "Thank you. For this specifically. You don't have to come tonight." She gave him the slight, precise look that he was beginning to understand meant she found his thanking her somewhat unnecessary but wasn't ungracious enough to say so. "I told you. I don't do things without a reason. A beat. I'll see you at 8. The walk up to Dumbledore's office that evening felt different from every other time Harry had made it. He'd made it in fear. He'd made it in grief. He'd made it in the particular complicated hope of a person who wanted to believe that the authority figure in front of them was fundamentally trustworthy. He'd made it in the aftermath of Cedric, in the aftermath of Sirius's supposed death, in the numb aftermath of a dozen things that didn't bear cataloging. He knew every gargoyle, every portrait, the specific quality of the winding staircase's ambient magic. Tonight he made it with Daphne at his shoulder, her footsteps absolutely even on the stone, her coat neat and her expression composed, and he felt none of the complicated hope. He felt clear. He felt, if he was honest, ready. The gargoyle stepped aside at the password. Dumbledore had sent it with his morning owl to both of them, which was a small, significant detail, the acknowledgement that this was a meeting for two, and they went up together. The office was exactly as it always was. Instruments spinning on their shelves, portraits of previous headmasters in various states of wakefulness, Fawkes on his perch. The Phoenix looked at Harry with the particular, deep, non-performative attention that Harry had always found in animals before he found it in people, and gave a low, soft note that was nothing like the full voice he'd heard in the Chamber of Secrets. Something shorter, quieter. Almost private. Dumbledore was behind his desk. He stood when they came in, which was the gesture of courtesy that he always made and which tonight Harry noted as the performance it also was. "Harry. Miss Greengrass. Do sit down." They sat. Daphne chose the chair slightly to the side, not hanging back, but positioned so that she could see both Harry and Dumbledore without being the focal point. Good geometry. Harry had the central chair, directly across the desk. He put his hands in his lap and looked at Dumbledore. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Dumbledore began. His voice was warm. "I hope the presence of a witness is comfortable for both of you. I have no desire to make anyone feel that formal precautions are unwelcome. They are, in fact, entirely reasonable. He was acknowledging the student charter request without making it a point of tension. Absorbing it, neutralizing it. Harry watched the technique and said, "Of course. I wanted to speak with you, Harry, because I have noticed over the past few days that something seems to have changed for you, and as your headmaster and as someone who cares very much about your well-being, I wanted to check in." He leaned forward slightly, the gesture of a person making themselves accessible. "Is there anything you'd like to share with me?" Harry let a beat of thoughtful silence pass. "I've been feeling more focused lately," he said. "I think it's the time of year, end of November, things start to settle into a rhythm." The tiniest, most practiced adjustment in Dumbledore's expression. He'd been hoping for more. "I'm glad to hear it." He glanced at Daphne, briefly, almost casually. "Miss Greengrass. It's good to see you. I understand you've been spending some time with Harry recently." "We share a couple of academic interests," Daphne said. Her voice was exactly as neutral as the situation required. Not warm, not cold. The tone of a student in a teacher's office, present and composed. "Indeed." Dumbledore smiled. "Slytherin and Gryffindor friendships are rarer than they should be. I've always thought the houses would benefit from more cross-pollination." He turned back to Harry. "Harry, there is one specific matter I did want to raise with you. I've become aware, through channels I won't go into detail about, that someone may have been accessing records pertaining to you. Formal records. I want you to know that if anyone has been making you aware of information that seems alarming, or incomplete, I am here to provide context." There it was. Wrapped in gentleness, delivered with care, but there, he knew about the audit. He was moving to get ahead of it. Harry felt it land, felt the offer being extended. "Come to me, let me explain, let me be the one who contextualizes this for you, as I have always been the one." He looked at Dumbledore and felt the full, cold, crystalline clarity of the last 4 days. "I appreciate that, Professor," he said. "If I have questions, I'll know where to come." He watched Dumbledore absorb this, the non-answer, the deflection that wasn't a deflection but a closed door. Something moved in the blue eyes. The calculation happened fast and almost invisibly, but Harry caught the edge of it. "Of course," Dumbledore said pleasantly. They stayed for another 20 minutes. Dumbledore talked about the upcoming Hogsmeade trip, about Harry's defense against the dark arts performance, about a book he'd been meaning to recommend. He was impeccably gracious and completely unrevealing, and so was Harry, and so, beside him, was Daphne, and at the end of it they thanked him and left and walked the length of the moving staircase in complete silence. In the corridor at the bottom, out of range of the office, Daphne said, "He knows about the audit. He knows someone filed something. He doesn't know what we found yet, or he'd have been less measured. He's going to find out." "Yes. We have 2 weeks before we file with the Wisengamot." She looked at him. "We need to move faster." "I know," Harry said. Above them, in the office they'd just left, Fawkes gave another low, soft note, muffled through stone and distance, barely audible. It might have been directed at anyone. It might have been the sound of something old and knowing, marking the moment a long-running story changed direction. Harry walked back through the castle with his hands in his pockets and the gold-warm hum of 38% of his natural magic running clean and free in his chest, and thought, 2 weeks. He could do a great deal in 2 weeks. Chapter 4, Smoke and Mirrors. The second removal session was on Friday. Harry didn't tell anyone outside the core group it was happening, which meant he'd told Ron, Hermione, Daphne, and Sirius, and nobody else. He took the same short-notice vault access permission slip route, McGonagall signed it with the same grim efficiency, and he was in the lower chamber at Gringotts by 2 in the afternoon with Sharpclaw and the 3 assessors arranged in their positions around the rune circle. This session addressed 31 of the remaining 87 interferences, the binding spells, all 47 of them, minus the 6 that were too deeply integrated with the Category 1 drains they'd already removed to separate cleanly. Those 6 would come in the final session. Sharpclaw had explained the sequencing with characteristic precision. The active drains first, because they were the most immediately harmful. The bindings second, because they were the most numerous and their removal would produce the most visible change in Harry's magical output. The suppressions and redirections last, because they were the most structurally complex and required the core to be stable and partially restored before the deeper work could be safely done. Today will be different from last week, Sharpclaw said, before they began. Different how? Last week was depth. The drains were sunk into your core like roots. He set his hands flat on the workbench beside him, examining his notes. The bindings are different. They sit across your magical output like, imagine a series of filters on a lamp. They don't reduce the flame. They change what light gets through. He looked up. Removing them is less intense than the drains. But it is more precise. You will feel each one individually. How many are we doing? 31. Harry nodded. He sat in the circle. The chair had been replaced, a heavier one, reinforced with goblin metalwork, which he found both practical and slightly funny. Vaultkeeper Mira caught his expression and said, with complete seriousness, the last one was oak. We've used iron alloy this time. Then she said nothing else, which was also slightly funny, and Harry decided he liked Vaultkeeper Mira very much. 31 removals. It took 2 hours. Each one was distinct, which Sharpclaw had warned him about, but the warning hadn't quite captured what distinct meant in practice. Each binding came off like the removing of a specific restriction on a specific thing. Lifting the binding on his transfiguration instinct felt like a door opening on a room he hadn't known was there, suddenly full of dimensional awareness, an understanding of the relationship between objects and their fundamental natures that was immediate and textured and startling. Lifting the one on his charm's capacity produced a brief, involuntary pulse of energy that knocked a goblin rune off the wall, cleanly, without breaking it. It simply detached and floated 6 inches before Grimfong caught it with practiced calm. Lifting the binding on his magical empathy was the strangest. He felt the castle. Not metaphorically. Not like the vague ambient magic he'd always been aware of at Hogwarts, that background hum he'd grown so accustomed to he'd stopped noticing it. This was immediate and specific and vast, the full weight of Hogwarts' 1,000 years of magic, all of its overlapping wards and enchantments and histories, pressing into his awareness like a language he suddenly spoke. He could feel where the wards were strong and where they were thin, could feel the monitoring hexes embedded in the second-floor corridor, could feel something else, something deeper, older than the school's operational magic, a foundational layer that felt ancient and weirdly alive and that he suspected had been there since before the school had a name. Sharpclaw said 29, in his auditor's voice. I can feel the castle, Harry said. Magical empathy at your level will extend to significant magical structures within approximately a quarter-mile radius, Sharpclaw said, making a note. At full restoration, the range will be considerably larger. How much larger? Sharpclaw looked at Grimfong. Grimfong looked at the ceiling. Theoretically unlimited, Sharpclaw said carefully, for structures with which you have established a magical relationship. Hogwarts qualifies. You have lived here for 6 years. Harry sat with that for a moment, the castle pressing softly into the edges of his awareness like a living thing that had noticed he'd finally arrived. He thought about what that meant. What you could do with that kind of relationship to a place. 30, said Sharpclaw. 1 remaining. The last binding was the one on his dueling instinct. He'd been thinking about this one since he first read about it in the report. Mad Eye's voice saying tension makes you slow. Every duel he'd ever been in, every fight, every moment where he'd survived more on luck and instinct than skill and power, the near misses, the losses, the moments where the gap between him and whoever he was fighting should have been bigger than it was. He'd always put it down to training deficit, to the fact that he'd learned to fight in the field rather than in a classroom. The idea that he had a natural dueling instinct that had been bound up and put away before he could even walk, Sharpclaw removed it. It didn't feel like a door opening this time. It felt like a key turning in a lock that had been there all along, the specific, deep click of something that had always been part of the mechanism finally doing what it was built to do. And with it came not a surge of power but a quiet, settling clarity, a spatial awareness, a reading of his own body's relationship to his magic, an understanding of angles that was completely wordless and completely immediate, like a musician who'd been playing with 3 fingers suddenly having use of all 10. He stood up. The iron alloy chair was undamaged. The room was warm and lit with the amber gold that seemed to follow him now, softer than last week, more integrated, more his. Session 2 complete, Sharpclaw said. 47 bindings removed, 7 drains removed, total 54 interferences cleared of 94. We are at approximately 57% of your natural magical capacity, Mr. Potter. 57%. Harry flexed his fingers. The gold warmth around them was steady now, not the involuntary surge of last week but a natural quality, like the warmth of skin. He looked at his hands and thought about 43 remaining interferences and what 57% felt like standing on the side of a mountain at midpoint, looking at both the valley below and the summit above. Final session, he said. When? Next Friday. 1 week. Sharpclaw closed his notes. Between now and then, Mr. Potter, your magic will be integrating what was restored today. You may find it, present, in ways you're not used to. Objects may respond to your attention before you consciously direct them. Your occlumency may begin asserting itself instinctively, which means you may experience sudden clarity in situations where you've previously been affected by external emotional influence. Harry thought about Dumbledore's office. The gentle, experienced pressure of that meeting, the way the room itself had seemed to angle towards certain emotional states, the specific warmth of the fire, the carefully positioned portraits, Fawkes's passive, ambient calming magic. I've already been in 1 meeting with him, Harry said. This week. I'm aware, Sharpclaw said, with the tone of someone who had been briefed. Daphne had sent Sharpclaw a summary of the Sunday meeting. Harry knew, the goblin had wanted to track the case timeline in real time. How did it go? We gave him nothing. Good. Sharpclaw looked at him steadily. The week ahead will be the difficult one. He is moving. We are moving. The question is which of you moves in a way the other cannot contain. A pause. File the emancipation petition before the end of the week. Daphne's drafting it now. Tell her to finish today. Daphne finished it that evening. She was in the Slytherin common room, which was empty enough at 8 on a Friday that she had a corner of the stone-arched study space to herself, her notes spread around her, a cup of tea going cold at her elbow. The petition had been through 4 drafts, not because the language was difficult but because each draft had revealed a further layer of what needed to be said, and she had a strong instinct that in legal documents, the shape of the argument mattered as much as its contents. The final draft was 4 pages. Dense, precise, organized in the sequence Hermione had helped her understand: statement of standing, statement of harm, evidentiary basis, legal precedent, requested remedy. The language was formal where it needed to be formal and stark where it needed to be stark, and in the section on statement of harm she had written things that she had composed very carefully, because they were about a real person and would be read by strangers making decisions about his life, and she had wanted them to be true in a way that was larger than facts. Tracy appeared over her shoulder and read the last paragraph silently. Then she straightened up and said nothing for a moment. "You wrote that really well," she said finally, in a quiet voice. Daphne capped her quill. "Accuracy helps. It's more than accurate." Tracy sat down beside her, looking at the parchment. "Daphne. Is this still just about fixing something that was wrong, or, it's about fixing something that was wrong?" Daphne said. "Right." Tracy looked at her with the particular quality of a friend who knows you well enough to know when you're answering a different question than the one they asked. "Okay. Don't, Daphne said. I'm not doing anything. You're making a face. I have only one face. You have 17 faces, and right now you're doing the face that means you're thinking something and being gracious enough not to say it. Daphne rolled the petition, sealed it with her personal wax seal. It doesn't matter. What matters is getting this to Sharpclaw tomorrow so it can be filed on Monday. Tracy leaned her chin on her hand. He came back from Gringotts different this afternoon, she said. I saw him in the entrance hall. The air around him is different. You can't quite look directly at him the way you used to, there's something in the periphery. Daphne thought about Harry at the staff table Thursday night, holding Dumbledore's gaze for 3 seconds without looking away, the quality of absolute resolution in his face. She thought about him in the shrieking shack on Saturday morning, saying I want to know who else he's done this to. Yes, she said simply. And you're fine, Tracy said. You're completely fine. Tracy. Just checking. She stood, smoothed her skirt, picked up her own homework. For what it's worth, which is considerable because I'm usually right, I think it's the least surprising thing that's happened this year. She walked away across the common room. Daphne looked at the sealed petition in her hands for a moment, then tucked it into her bag and went back to her potions essay. The petition was with Sharpclaw by Sunday. Gringotts filed it with the Wisengamot on Monday morning. Harry found out via a brief message from Sharpclaw delivered by the Gringotts bird relay, 3 words, filed. Hearing scheduled. He was in the middle of defense against the dark arts when it arrived, folded in the pages of his textbook via a method Sharpclaw had established specifically for in-class communication, and he read it and closed the book and spent the rest of the lesson with the quiet, private knowledge sitting in his chest like a lit match. The match caught on Wednesday. He didn't know it was happening until it had already happened. He was walking to breakfast, early, before most of the castle was properly awake, because he'd started waking early in the week following the second removal session, his newly restored instincts apparently uninterested in sleeping past 6. The great hall was perhaps a third full, the morning light coming through the enchanted ceiling in the pale, watery gold of a late November dawn. He was thinking about the Wisengamot timeline, turning it over in the specific automatic way he'd been turning over tactical problems since Dumbledore's Sunday meeting, when he walked into the hall and felt it. Something had changed. He stopped in the entrance, which earned him a slight collision from a third year coming in behind him, and stood still for a moment, feeling the castle. This was still new, the magical empathy, reopened a week ago, was integrating slowly, not yet fully fluent but increasingly readable. And what he was reading now, from the walls and the floors and the deep, warm ambient magic of the hall, was that something had been done. He moved to the Gryffindor table, sat, looked around the hall. It was a normal Wednesday breakfast. Students arriving in the gradual tide of morning. Staff appearing at the high table. Nothing visibly wrong. He reached out with the new sense, gently, tentatively, because he was still learning the edges of it, and felt the shape of the monitoring magic in the second-floor corridor, still there, unchanged. Felt the ward schema across the entrance hall, the strong, layered protections on the gates, there. On the main post route. The Ollery to Common Rooms communication pathway that every Hogwarts student used for mail. Something new sat on it, woven in so carefully that it would be invisible to standard detection charms. A filter. An intercept. New enough that it hadn't fully integrated yet into the castle's background magic, he could feel the difference in texture between the old wards and this fresh edition, the way you can feel a new stitch in old fabric. He pulled out of the sensing and sat very still with his porridge getting cold in front of him. Someone had added a mail intercept to the main communication pathway overnight. Not a block, that would have been noticed immediately. A copy function. Every owl post in or out of the student common rooms was now being read somewhere. Dumbledore. He was reading the mail. Harry thought about Sirius's letters, which he'd been careful to route through the Gringotts relay rather than the castle system. He thought about Daphne's library book method. He thought about his mirror. None of them used the compromised pathway. They were okay. But Ron had sent a letter to his mother 2 days ago via school owl. Hermione had written to her parents. Neville had been corresponding regularly with his gran about something. Harry didn't know what. That was Neville's business, but the point was that the privacy of every student in this school had just been removed overnight by a man who had decided that controlling information was worth more than the rights of the people he was nominally protecting. The anger was different this time. Sharper. More immediate. Because this wasn't about him, or not only about him. This was about Ron's letter to Molly Weasley about what he was eating for breakfast. About Hermione's news to her parents about her marks. About 320 students whose correspondence was now being quietly reviewed by a man with an agenda. He sent Daphne the library message at 7:30 a.m., before classes. New intercept on the main post route. Added overnight. Do not use school owl system for anything sensitive. Tell Zabini. I need to talk to Hermione and Ron before first period. Can you check with your father about the ward schema before his next Board of Governors communication? I need to know how deep this goes. Her response came back within 20 minutes. She must have gone to the library before breakfast entirely. Already felt something off when I walked past the Ollery. Confirmed your reading. Father's letter is already going out, not school owl, personal courier. Tracy and Blaze are aware. If he's added intercepts to the ward schema without board approval, it's a separate violation from the audit findings, Board of Governors oversight authority, potentially actionable on its own. Save this. He kept the note. He went and found Ron and Hermione and told them in 15 words before History of Magic, Dumbledore added a mail intercept overnight. Don't use school owls for anything private. Ron's jaw set in a way that meant he was furious and was choosing to save it for later, which Harry had always respected about him. Ron felt things enormously and immediately and had learned, over years of friendship in high-stakes situations, to file the enormity for when it was useful. Right, he said. Got it. Hermione said, that's a violation of the Hogwarts Student Privacy Provision of 1899 and the Standard Wizarding Privacy Act. Students have an explicit legal right to private correspondence. She said it in the very flat voice she used when she was angry enough that the anger had gone past heat and come out the other side as cold. I'm adding it to the case document. Please, Harry said. The confrontation in the Great Hall was not planned. He had not intended for it to happen Wednesday lunchtime. He had, in fact, spent the better part of the week actively planning to avoid any public confrontation until the Wisengamot hearing, because Daphne had said, with impeccable logic, that controlled environments were better environments, and a Wisengamot chamber was more controlled than the Great Hall at lunch. He'd agreed. He'd meant it. What happened was that Seamus Finnegan asked a question at the Gryffindor table that had apparently been going around the common room for 3 days, which was whether it was true that Harry had been at Gringotts twice in the past 2 weeks, and Harry said yes, it was true, and Seamus said why, and Harry said vault business, and Dean Thomas, from 3 seats down, said he'd heard from a Hufflepuff whose cousin worked at Gringotts that something big was going on with Harry's account, some kind of formal audit. And at that exact moment, the hall went slightly quiet in the particular way it went quiet when conversations carrying enough energy begin to pull attention from surrounding tables. And in that quiet, carrying from the Hufflepuff table with the projection of someone who hadn't meant to be overheard across the hall but had misjudged the silence, well, Dumbledore obviously knows about it, he'll have sorted it out, he always handles things like that for Potter. Harry set down his fork. He did it very calmly, and the calmness was the thing that drew attention rather than any dramatic gesture, because Harry Potter setting things down calmly in the middle of the Great Hall had a specific quality that was somehow more noticeable than shouting would have been. Heads turned. The hall got a degree quieter. I don't think he has, actually, Harry said. He pitched it to Carrie, not loud, just clear, the way Sirius spoke when he wanted a room to hear him. Handled it. He was aware, without looking, of the staff table. Of Dumbledore, at its center. The audit found 94 illegal magical interferences on my core, Harry said. 73 of them have been removed over the past 2 weeks. The remaining 21 come off Friday. He kept his voice completely even. Around him, the hall was going very still, the ripple of attention spreading outward from the Gryffindor table across the room. Some of those spells were placed when I was 14 months old. 7 of them were active drains on my magical core that have been running continuously for 15 years. He paused. They were all placed by the same person. He had not planned this speech. It was not a speech. It was just, the truth, stated clearly, to the people he lived with every day, in the place where everything pretended to be what it was. The great hall had portraits and enchanted windows and a ceiling that reflected the sky, and for 6 years it had also reflected the particular consensual fiction that everything was being managed, that the man at the center of the staff table was managing it, that the weight on Harry's shoulders was just the weight of destiny and not the weight of something someone had put there on purpose. He was done with the fiction. The Wiesengemot has been notified, he said. There will be a formal hearing. And if you're wondering whether Professor Dumbledore is aware, he's known something was happening for the past week. He called me to his office on Monday to suggest I seek his perspective before acting on any information that might seem alarming. He looked across the hall at the staff table, at the long white beard and the half-moon spectacles and the blue eyes that had gone very, very still. I didn't find that suggestion very useful, personally. The silence in the great hall was total. Not the silence of shock, though there was that. Not the silence of scandal, though there was that too. More the silence of a room in which something that has been pressing against a wall from the inside has finally come through, and everyone present is processing the new shape of the space. Dumbledore had not moved. His expression was, "She would think about this later." Daphne, who was watching from the Slytherin table with the focused attention of a person watching a chess game whose next move will determine everything, his expression was the saddest thing she'd seen in a long time. Not anger. Not guilt. Something older and more complicated than either. The expression of a person who has known, somewhere far beneath their convictions, that a reckoning was eventually possible, and has arrived at it and finds it exactly as painful as they had known it would be. Professor McGonagall had her hands flat on the table. Snape had gone very still in a different way, the specific stillness of a person recalculating a large number of variables rapidly, whose face had gone to the careful neutral of someone keeping their reactions internal. Harry picked up his fork and went back to eating. The hall did not immediately resume its normal noise. It built back gradually, in the way noise builds back after a shock, tentative, then more confident, then louder as people began to talk about what they'd just heard. By the time Harry finished lunch, it was almost normal. Almost. He was gathering his bag to leave when a hand appeared on the edge of the table beside his tray. He looked up. Dumbledore was standing beside the Gryffindor table. He had walked the length of the hall, which nobody did, which was not a normal thing for him to do at lunch, and he was standing beside Harry with the same sad expression, close and personal now rather than distant and still. Around them, the immediate area of table had gone quiet. Nobody moved. "Harry," Dumbledore said, very gently. "I wonder if we might speak privately." Harry looked at him. "I think everything I have to say is better said publicly," he said. "And everything you have to say, I'll hear at the hearing." Dumbledore stood still for a moment. And then he said, not to Harry, but to the table at large, to the hall, which was absolutely listening, "I hope you will trust that my intentions toward you have always been grounded in love." Harry thought about the report. About the Category 1 drains running for 15 years. About the binding on his dueling instinct. About a 14-month-old boy on the magical equivalent of a table and someone standing over him with the knowledge and the skill and the purpose to construct 94 interlocking enchantments. "I think," Harry said, "that's probably true. And I think that's the most troubling part of it." He stood up, shouldered his bag, and walked out of the great hall. He was aware of the sound of the hall behind him, 320 students all beginning to talk at once, and then he was through the doors and in the corridor and the sound was behind him, and he kept walking. Daphne caught up with him on the second floor. She had evidently moved fast, because she was slightly breathless, which was one of the few times he had ever seen her look anything other than composed, and it made her look. He set that aside and kept walking. "That wasn't the plan," she said, falling into step. "I know. It was also," she stopped herself. Started again. It was effective. He can't undo what was just said in front of 300 people. The narrative is public now, which means if he tries to move against us before the hearing, he does it in full view. "I know," Harry said again. She looked at him sideways. "You're not sorry." "I'm not." "Good." She was quiet for a moment. They were moving toward the 5th floor, no particular destination, just motion. He came to the table. "That was unexpected. He's more reactive than I modeled. He's not used to being publicly contradicted by a 16-year-old in his own hall," Harry said. 40 years of that specific authority does something to a person's expectations. "You could hear the hall shift," she said. "When you said the number. 94. People heard it and it landed." A pause. "Harry. I think what you did just now is going to matter more than any of our strategic preparation. Not instead of it. But alongside it. You gave it a face." He stopped walking. She stopped a half step after him and turned to look at him, and they were in an empty section of the second-floor corridor, afternoon light through the tall windows, nobody else present, and he was looking at her with the same directness she'd given him in the conference room 3 weeks ago. "You started this," he said. "Yes. You filed an audit on a person you barely knew because something was wrong and it bothered you and you decided to do something about it." He held her gaze. "Do you know how few people in my life have ever done that? Decided something was wrong and acted on it without being asked, without there being anything in it for them?" She held his gaze steadily. Something moved in her expression, careful, specific, the particular quality of someone allowing themselves to be seen in a way they don't usually allow. "There was something in it for me," she said. "The truth. I don't tolerate things being systematically wrong, and this was systematically wrong, and fixing systematically wrong things it matters to me. It's not entirely selfless. It's entirely enough," he said. The something in her expression deepened and then she looked away, sideways, toward the window, toward the grounds and the dark tree line in the afternoon gray. "The Board of Governors letter," she said. "My father replied this morning. The ward intercept was added without board approval or notification. That's a statutory violation of the Hogwarts Charter of Educational Governance." She produced a folded parchment from her coat, her father's letter, he could tell from the seal. "Sharpclaw has already been informed. It's being added to the Wisengamot filing as a supplementary charge." "How did your father take it?" Harry asked. "Knowing what the audit found. What it means." She was quiet for a moment. "My father is a complicated man," she said, which was the most personal thing she'd said to him, and she said it with the complete evenness of someone who had made their peace with a complicated thing. "He takes preserving the established order seriously, and Dumbledore is a significant part of that order. But he also takes the law seriously. And his daughter's judgment, apparently." A very slight pause. "He told me to be careful." "Are you?" She looked back from the window. "I'm always careful," she said. "It doesn't mean I stop." He almost said something to that, he felt it on the edge of his mouth, something about knowing that about her, about having identified it as the thing that made her different from every other careful person he knew, the combination of precision and fearlessness that didn't announce itself but was simply present. He almost said it. "Sharpclaw wants the final session done before the hearing is formally scheduled," he said instead. "Friday's session will complete the removal." 100%, she said. "Then we'll know what we're actually working with." He paused. "I'll know." She looked at him with the steady, precise attention that he'd learned to read, over the past 3 weeks, as its own form of warmth. "Whatever it is," she said, "it's going to be more than enough." Thursday was the longest day. The Great Hall had changed. Not dramatically, Hogwarts' social architecture was resilient, and life moved on from even seismic events with the particular institutional determination of a place that had survived 1,000 years of them. But the quality of the attention had shifted. He was looked at differently. Not the old look, the weighing, the mythologizing, the particular discomfort of being someone's symbol. This was something more grounded. People looked at him and he could see them recalibrating. Deciding things. Neville Longbottom appeared at his shoulder in the herbology greenhouse and said, very quietly, "If you need anyone to speak on your behalf at the hearing, I'll do it." He said it with the careful specificity of someone who had thought about it for a while, and Harry said, "Thank you, Neville, I might take you up on that," and Neville nodded and went back to his devil's snare with the compressed dignity of a person who had said the thing they needed to say. Luna Lovegood handed him a copy of the Quibbler in the library and said the Nargles were much less active around him this week than last week, which she found encouraging, and when he started to ask what that meant she said she thought it meant something that had been blocking his sight was gone. Then she drifted away through the stacks. Draco Malfoy said nothing. But he looked at Harry across the Great Hall at dinner with an expression that was unreadable in the usual Malfoy way, carefully composed, deliberately neutral, except for one moment, just one, when something moved behind his eyes that Harry couldn't categorize. Not sympathy. Not hostility. Something more complicated than either, the look of a person who is reconsidering a number of things simultaneously and hasn't reached conclusions yet. Harry noted it and kept eating. Dumbledore did not appear at dinner Thursday evening. His chair was empty. McGonagall sat in her own chair with the same grounded, upright authority she always had, and when Harry glanced at her she looked back steadily and briefly and then returned to her food. He thought about what she was doing with her copy of the 30-page report. He thought about 30-year-old information recontextualizing a lifetime of professional loyalty. He thought about how much courage that particular process took and how completely silently she was managing it. He sent her a library book message that evening. It said simply, "Thank you for believing it." Her reply came back before lights out, tucked into a Transfiguration text 3 shelves from its proper location. "See to it that this doesn't happen to anyone else." "That is sufficient, thanks." Friday came like a clean break in weather. The Gringotts chamber felt different for the third time. The rune walls had been reset, fresh amber light in the carved characters, the iron alloy chair steady in the center of the circle. Sharpclaw and the 3 assessors in their positions. The familiar warmth of the room, the subsonic note of old goblin magic in the stone. Harry sat. He looked at Sharpclaw. 22 suppressions and 18 redirections, Sharpclaw said. Plus the 6 bindings we saved from session 1. Total 26. He paused. This session will complete the restoration. When it is finished, you will have full access to your natural magical capacity for the first time since you were 14 months old. He said it evenly, professionally, and then he did something Harry had not seen him do in 3 sessions. He looked up from his notes and looked at Harry directly, just for a moment, without the auditor's careful neutrality. "Ready?" "Yes," Harry said. The session took 90 minutes. The suppressions came off one by one and each one was different, the occlumency suppression lifting and the world going immediately, startlingly clear, every ambient emotional pressure in the room becoming visible and manageable rather than invisible and influential. The transfiguration suppression and the sudden, deep understanding of material and form. The charm suppression and a rush of intuitive connection to the ambient magic in the room, every rune on every wall suddenly legible in a way he couldn't quite explain but knew, felt in the way he felt a familiar melody. The redirections were the most complex. Each one was a pathway that had been carrying his own energy somewhere else, and as each was closed and the energy rerouted back, the physical sensation was cumulative. Building, session by session, toward something enormous. By the time they reached the last 6 bindings, the room was lit gold-white again, brighter than either previous session, and Grimfong had given up pretending he wasn't awed and was simply watching with his full attention. The last binding came off. What followed was not an explosion. It was not dramatic in the way stories described power, no shaking walls, no shattering glass, nothing violent. It was vast. The only word for it. Quiet and vast and utterly complete, like the moment of full sunrise when the last edge of the sun clears the horizon and the light is everywhere at once, entire and unapologetic and simply the way things are when nothing is in the way. He sat in the iron alloy chair and breathed. He felt the castle, all of it, every ward, every enchantment, every old deep layer of foundational magic, everything that Hogwarts had been and done and held for 1,000 years, felt it the way you feel your own heartbeat, intimate and constant and present. He felt the 57 monitoring enchantments Dumbledore had placed on the Hogwarts communication system, each one as distinct as a fingerprint. He felt the forbidden forest beyond the gates, old and vast and breathing. He felt the lake. He felt the people. Not their thoughts, not their emotions in any invasive way, but their magical presence, each one distinct, each one real. Somewhere in the castle above him, he could feel Daphne Greengrass in the library, her magic quiet and precise and intensely alive. He could feel Sirius in Edinburgh, a warm fixed point 40 miles north. He opened his eyes. Sharpclaw said, 94. Complete. Harry stood up. The chair was undamaged. The floor was undamaged. The walls were exactly as they'd been at the start of the session, which he suspected had less to do with the session being less powerful than the others and more to do with the fact that at full restoration, his control had integrated naturally with his power, the way a river at full flow is not more violent than a constrained one, just more itself. He stood in the center of the circle and felt, 100%. The hearing, he said to Sharpclaw. When is it? The Wisengamot has scheduled it for 10 days from today. Sharpclaw closed his notes, all 3 volumes, and placed them together in the document case with the deliberate, satisfied motion of a craftsman completing a long commission. December the 14th. 10 days. The gold light in the room, his light, he understood now, the ambient glow of a natural Omega-tier core operating without impediment for the first time in 15 years, settled around him, steady and warm. Not performance. Not threat. Just true. Good, Harry said. We'll be ready. Chapter 5, Fires at Gringotts. The attack came at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. Harry felt it before he was fully awake, a sharp, discordant pulse through the castle's ambient magic, like a string snapping on an instrument he'd been listening to for 6 years. He was sitting up in bed before he'd consciously decided to move, heart already steady rather than racing, which was new. The old Harry, the restricted Harry, had woken from danger with the scrambling adrenaline of someone who'd been caught off guard. This was different. His magic had woken first and brought the rest of him along. He reached for his glasses, his wand, sat in the dark for 3 seconds reading the shape of what he was feeling. Not in the castle. Outside it. Beyond the gates. Gringotts. He was dressed and at the door of the dormitory before he'd thought it through, moving on the pure instinct that the second session had unlocked, the dueling ready body awareness that was less calculation and more fluency. He was in the corridor when he remembered that human beings with friends generally told those friends when they were about to leave a building at 2 in the morning. He went back, shook Ron once, and said, Gringotts, something's wrong, tell Hermione when she wakes up, in one breath, and left before Ron could fully process it. He went to the library first. Not because it made logical sense. Because the magical empathy told him something he hadn't expected, Daphne was awake too. He could feel her presence in the castle, not sleeping, moving, coming from the direction of the dungeons. He paused at the foot of the library staircase and she appeared at the far end of the corridor half a minute later, coat already on, looking unsurprised to find him there. You felt it, he said. Something hit the bank's ward structure, she said. I've been sleeping with a monitoring charm on Sharpclaw's communication rune since we filed the petition. It just pulsed. She was already moving past him toward the main stairs. Come on. Daphne, the castle gates, I know a way out. She said it without breaking stride, and he followed her because of course he followed her, and the way out turned out to be a concealed passage behind a tapestry on the 3rd floor that he'd genuinely never found, despite 6 years and the Marauder's map, which he mentally added to the list of things Daphne Greengrass knew that nobody had told her. How do you know about this? He said, in the narrow stone passage, running. 3rd year. I was very bored and the library was closed. A beat. Also my family built part of the East Wing in 1638. There are things in the architectural records. The passage came out in the grounds, behind the greenhouses, well outside the line of the castle's monitoring enchantments. The air was brutal, December, properly cold now, the frost crystalline on the grass underfoot. Harry had his invisibility cloak folded in his inner pocket, a habit he'd maintained since 4th year, and he pulled it out. Under, he said. She looked at the cloak and then at him, and for 1 second there was something in her expression, not hesitation exactly, more the recognition of a significant thing. Getting under the invisibility cloak with someone was not nothing. It required proximity. He held it up and waited, not pressing, and she stepped in beside him and he pulled it over both of them and the grounds folded over them like silence. They walked close because they had to. Her shoulder against his. The frost making their breath visible in the air above the cloak's edge, which was the one vulnerability that Harry had always known about and had never quite figured out how to fix. The castle's lights were mostly dark behind them. Ahead, the road to Hogsmeade was a pale line in the moonlight. Can you feel what's happening? She asked, very quietly. He reached out with the empathy, carefully, pushing the range further than he usually tried. Gringotts was in Diagon Alley, not Hogsmeade, but Sharpclaw had told him the bank's ward structure was deeply rooted, connected to goblin ley lines that ran beneath the whole of Wizarding Britain, and those lines were readable if you knew what to feel for. Someone's in the archives, he said. In the lower levels. Not a goblin, wrong magical signature. And they're not breaking in. They're already in. He felt for the shape of it more carefully. They went in clean. They had keys, or something that functions like keys. This was planned. The audit records, Daphne said. All 3 volumes of Sharpclaw's notes are in the secure archive. The original audit documentation. If those are destroyed, the goblin copies they submitted to the Wizengamot are legally independent, he said. The originals don't change the case, they change the evidentiary completeness. Dumbledore's advocate will argue that without the primary source documentation, the Wizengamot copies are second-hand. It won't kill the case, but it gives them grounds to request delay, re-examination, independent verification by ministry assessors who can be influenced, he finished. They walked faster. The Hogsmeade Floo connection was in the 3 broomsticks, which was locked and dark. Daphne produced a small silver instrument from her coat pocket, pressed it to the lock, and the door opened with a sound like a sigh, which Harry filed under Greengrass family resources are apparently considerable and kept moving. The flue was cold and unlit. She reached past him, tapped the grate with her wand, and the flames came up green. Gringotts, she said, stepped through, and was gone. He followed. The entrance hall of Gringotts at 2:30 in the morning was lit by emergency goblin fire, a cold, blue-white light that made the gold of the vaults and pillars look silver. 3 goblin security officers were at the doors. 4 more were moving toward the back of the hall at speed. Harry came through the flue and registered all of this in approximately 2 seconds before a very familiar voice said, "Potter," from his left in a tone that contained pure professional urgency. Sharpclaw. He was in his formal coat but his hair was uncharacteristically disordered, which on a goblin communicated roughly what seeing a judge without their wig would on a human. He looked at Harry, then at Daphne behind him, and with the economy of someone who had no time for anything unnecessary said, "They're in the subarchive." Level 7. 2 intruders. They have Gringotts access codes that were invalidated 8 months ago. Someone's been holding them since before we started the audit process. Before the audit, Daphne said, catching it immediately. Someone knew this case was possible before we filed it. That implication is not lost on me, Sharpclaw said, already moving. Come. You want our help? Harry said, keeping pace. You are the subject of the audit records being targeted. Under Goblin law, you have material interest in their protection and are therefore extended auxiliary standing in their defense. He produced 2 small bronze discs from his pocket and handed one to each of them without breaking stride. These are temporary access tokens. They will allow you passage through the lower-level security wards. Do not touch anything that isn't actively threatening you. A pause. That last instruction is particularly directed at Mr. Potter. That seems unfair, Harry said. It seems accurate, Daphne said. They went down. The goblin security lifts were different from the cart system used for vault access, faster, more direct, dropping through stone with a smooth certainty that felt less like falling and more like being moved. Level 7 was deep enough that the air changed, becoming cooler and stiller, the particular quality of air that hadn't moved in centuries. The corridors were narrower here, cut from raw rock rather than finished stone, lit by the same cold blue emergency fire. Sharpclaw stopped them at a junction. He put out his hand, flat, palm down, the goblin gesture for hold. His eyes, in the blue light, were very sharp. Harry felt it too. 2 signatures, ahead. One of them familiar in the way that things felt familiar when he'd been sensing them from a distance, the monitoring enchantments on the castle communication system, the signature embedded in the wards he'd first noticed the day Dumbledore had added the mail intercept. The same hand. Not Dumbledore himself. He'd have felt Dumbledore's signature the way you'd feel a fire in a dark room. This was someone working on Dumbledore's behalf, carrying Dumbledore's access codes. More contained. More careful. More afraid. One of them is scared, Harry said, quietly. Sharpclaw looked at him. Can you tell which? The one on the left. Down the secondary passage. He tilted his head, reading the texture of it. The other one isn't scared. The other one is, focused. Professional. He paused. Different scared from the same person. The professional one is scared of being caught. The scared one is scared of something else. Something behind them. An agent who doesn't entirely trust their employer, Daphne said, with the calm precision of someone drawing a logical conclusion. That's potentially useful. Sharpclaw made a decision in approximately 3/4 of a second, which Harry was beginning to understand was simply goblin processing speed. Split. I take the secondary passage. You too, main archive corridor. The records are behind the vault door at the corridor's end. They will try to destroy them through the door rather than open it, because they cannot open it. Buy me 3 minutes. He moved left and was gone, with a silence that was entirely at odds with his size. Harry looked at Daphne. She had her wand already in her hand, he hadn't seen her draw it. He drew his own, feeling the connection to it settle differently than it ever had before, the wand's energy meeting his own full power for the first time. The wand had always worked. Now it felt, for the first time, like it had room to work. They went right. The main archive corridor was 20 feet of raw rock ending in a vault door that was built on a scale that suggested someone had wanted to make a point, 12 feet of goblin alloy steel, covered in runework that pulsed with active ward energy. In front of it stood a figure in dark robes with a wand raised, performing what Harry recognized as a sustained dissolving charm, the kind used on ward structures, complex and power-hungry, and whoever this was, they were good. A section of the vault door's outer rune layer was already smoking. He was good. But he was also, Harry noted, not expecting anyone to come from behind him, because Gringotts at 2 in the morning was supposed to be empty of anything except goblins, and goblins didn't use wands. "Stop," Harry said. The figure spun. Dark robes, a mask, simple, not Death Eater elaborate, just a plain black covering of features that meant they hadn't wanted to be recognized even by a potential ally. Wand up and a curse already forming, the motion of someone who trained extensively, body memory fast and decisive. Harry didn't think about it. The instinct, unbound now, simply read the angle and the intent and responded. He banished the curse sideways before it fully formed, not blocking it, redirecting it, a subtle distinction that he hadn't been able to manage before the sessions because it required a dueling instinct precise enough to read a spell's trajectory in the half-second between casting and arrival. The curse hit the rock wall and the rock wall lost approximately 2 feet of its surface. The figure cast again. Harry moved, not dodged, moved, sideways and forward simultaneously, the way Mad Eye had tried to teach him, and he'd always been half a step too slow for, the economy of motion that came from reading the whole space rather than reacting to the point of threat. He caught the second curse on a shield charm that cost him almost nothing, felt the comparative ease of it and understood for the first time in his life what magic felt like when you were actually using yours. "Daphne," he said. She'd already moved to the vault door. Her wand was on the smoking rune layer, not attacking the intruder, repairing. She was repairing the wards in real time while he kept the intruder occupied, which was exactly the right call and which she'd made without instruction, because she'd read the situation and prioritized the objective. The intruder launched 3 spells in rapid sequence, fast and varied, a different style from the first 2, adapting. Harry read the sequence and thought, almost with surprise, this person is very good. He countered all 3, the first with a shield, the second with a redirect that sent it into the ceiling in a shower of harmless sparks, the third by simply stepping aside, and the ease of it was disorienting in the best possible way, like running at full stride for the first time and discovering that the ground was actually level. He cast once, returning. Not a combat curse, a binding charm, enhanced by the full weight of an Omega tier core behind it, and it hit the intruder like a physical force, wrapping them in light, locking their wand arm, dropping them to one knee. The figure struggled and the binding held with the unspectacular certainty of a knot tied correctly. Harry lowered his wand. "The vault door," he said. "Runes are restored," Daphne said, without turning. "Outer layer intact." They hadn't reached the inner ward. She stepped back from the door and turned to look at the bound figure on the floor, and her expression was perfectly composed and somehow also very, very interested. "Let's see who this is." Harry reached out and removed the mask. He didn't recognize the face, young, maybe mid-20s, with close-cut dark hair and an angular jaw and an expression of combined defiance and fear that was exactly what he'd felt in the magical signature. A young man, well-trained, in someone else's service, and not entirely sure that service was worth this. "I don't know you," Harry said. "No," the young man said. His voice was controlled. "Barely. You were using Dumbledore's access codes." Something moved in his face. Not denial. Not confirmation. The face of someone calculating how much danger various truths carry. "The codes were provided to me." "By whom?" "I don't, you do," Harry said, without inflection. "And you're frightened." "Not of me specifically, of whoever sent you. Because whoever sent you also has something over you, or you wouldn't be here at 2 in the morning destroying records in a goblin bank for them." He crouched to be at eye level with the young man, his wand loose in his hand, not threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm also not going to pretend I don't know what I felt when I came down this corridor. You're in over your head." A long silence. The blue emergency fire crackled in the wall brackets. Somewhere in the secondary passage, there was the sound of a brief, sharp exchange, not combat exactly, more the sound of a conversation happening under considerable pressure. "Grayson," the young man said, finally. "Marcus Grayson. I work at the Ministry. Department of Magical Law Enforcement." It was presented to me as a legal action. Suppression of legally sensitive materials under the confidentiality provision. The confidentiality provision covers ministry documentation, Daphne said from behind Harry. Not Gringotts' audit records. Whoever told you this was a legal action was lying to you. Grayson's jaw tightened. Yes, he said, after a moment. I've been beginning to understand that. Who gave you the codes and the instruction? Another long pause. Harry waited. He'd learned, over the past 2 weeks, that sometimes you just had to wait. Cornelius Fudge, Grayson said. Under instruction from, he stopped. I want a deal. I want formal legal protection before I name the instruction source. Harry straightened up. He looked at Daphne over his shoulder. She had already pulled a folded parchment from her coat. He would, at some later point, ask her what exactly she kept in that coat because the inventory was beginning to seem improbable, and was writing on it with a self-inking quill that she'd produced from somewhere. Gringotts has legal jurisdiction in this corridor, she said, writing. A statement given here and witnessed by a Gringotts auditor carries the same protection as ministry testimony under parliamentary immunity. I'm drafting the declaration now. I'm not a Gringotts auditor, Harry said. Sharpclaw is. She looked up. He'll be back in approximately 90 seconds. She was off by 40. Sharpclaw appeared at the corridor's end with the other intruder, who was bound more thoroughly than Grayson and appeared to be unconscious, being levitated in Sharpclaw's wake with the ease of a goblin who had performed this particular task many times. He looked at Grayson, then at Harry, then at Daphne's parchment. He read it in approximately 4 seconds. Adequate, he said. He looked at Grayson. I will sign as Gringotts auditor and witness. You will receive the stated protections. Speak. Grayson looked at Harry, not at Sharpclaw, which told Harry something about where he'd decided to direct his trust. Harry nodded once. Fudge gave me the codes and the instruction, Grayson said. He told me the records were a threat to national security. That they contained information that could destabilize the ministry's relationship with certain long-standing authorities. He told me it was sanctioned. A pause. The instruction behind Fudge came from Albus Dumbledore. The corridor was very quiet. Harry had known this was likely. Had not known it would land quite so heavily. Even so, the gap between knowing something probably and having it confirmed in a dark corridor at 3 a.m. with the vault door still smoking behind them. He stood with it for a moment, let it settle. Written, Sharpclaw said, to Daphne. She was already writing. Every word. They were back in the castle by 5. The Gringotts security team had taken custody of both intruders. The vault door had been repaired. Daphne's real-time ward work had caught the damage early enough that it was a 2-hour job rather than a 2-week one, which Vaultkeeper Mira had noted with the specific goblin manner of giving credit that consisted of a curt nod and a sentence that began with adequate. The audit records were intact. Grayson's signed testimony was with Sharpclaw, copied to the Wisengamot filing, and would be there when the Wisengamot clerk opened their correspondence at 9 a.m. The walk back from Hogsmeade to the castle was grey and cold and pre-dawn, the sky beginning its grudging lightning from absolute black toward the dark blue of early December mornings. Their breath fogged the air. The frost on the path caught the first suggestion of light and turned it back as a fine, scattered silver. They hadn't talked much since leaving Gringotts. There was a particular quality to exhaustion that Harry had experienced before, post-battle, post-crisis, the specific fatigue of a body that has run on high alert and is now releasing the tension in slow, even increments. He felt it now, and he could see it in the set of Daphne's shoulders, the slight loosening of her usual posture. Fudge, he said, into the morning quiet. Yes. Dumbledore used Fudge. He turned this over. Which means the ministry connection is on record now. Grayson's testimony puts Fudge in direct involvement, which means the Wisengamot can't pretend this is purely a matter of internal school governance. It becomes a ministry corruption matter. The two charges compound each other, she said. The audit findings established the harm to you. The Gringotts infiltration, attempted destruction of evidence, establishes consciousness of guilt. That's a legal concept. It means the act of trying to hide evidence is itself evidence that the perpetrator knew what they'd done was wrong. She paused. Dumbledore sent someone to destroy the proof. A judge who hadn't been considering the severity of the original charges will look at that and revise upward. Sharpclaw said the same thing, more or less. Sharpclaw is very good at his job. She stepped over a frost-cracked section of the path. How are you doing? The question surprised him not because she asked it but because of the way she asked it. Not are you okay, which was the social lubricant version, the question that expected a fine, just checking. How are you doing, an actual inquiry, expecting an actual answer. Strange, he said. Good strange. The magic, I noticed tonight that it wasn't something I was managing. It was just, there. I didn't think about any of it. The binding, the redirects, reading the tunnel. It was fluent. He paused. I've never been fluent before. I've always been working against something. She nodded, looking at the path ahead. I noticed. In the corridor. You moved differently. Was it obvious? To me. A beat. I've been watching your magic for 3 years. The difference is, she stopped, seemed to recalibrate the sentence. It looks like you, finally. The magic looks like you. He looked at her. The pre-dawn light was catching her face at a low angle, the cold bringing color to her cheekbones, her dark hair loose around her shoulders because she'd left in too much of a hurry to pin it up. She was looking at the path, not at him, and there was something in the line of her jaw and the steadiness of her expression that was, he set that aside, because now was not the time and the exhaustion was making everything feel more significant than it should. Daphne. She looked up. Thank you for coming tonight. You didn't have to, you already said that, she said. In the conference room. And the second time in the corridor after the Great Hall. I'll keep being where I need to be without being thanked for it. I know you will. He held her gaze. I'm saying it anyway. Something shifted in her expression, the careful composure not breaking, exactly, but easing, the way a muscle releases tension you hadn't noticed it carrying. She looked at him for a moment with the slight, precise look that he'd catalogued as her version of warmth, and then she looked back at the path. You should sleep, she said. You have 4 hours before breakfast. So do you. I sleep efficiently. A pause. Also Tracy will know something happened and she'll be waiting. He almost laughed. Is Tracy always waiting? Tracy operates on what she calls heightened friend awareness and what I call a very specific kind of nosiness that I've learned to work with because she's usually right about what she's being nosy about. She said it with the complete seriousness that was somehow funnier than if she'd said it with a smile, and this time he did laugh, short and genuine, and she looked at him sideways with the very slight, very real smile that he had seen once or twice now and that he thought she probably didn't know how much it changed her face. They came through the concealed passage behind the greenhouses, back into the castle's wards, and the familiar weight of Hogwarts' ambient magic settled over him, friendly, recognizable, home. He could feel the monitoring enchantments on the second-floor corridor like irritants, like a pebble in a shoe, and thought about what Sharpclaw would do with the knowledge that someone had tried to destroy the audit records, and about what 9 days until the hearing meant. At the junction of the corridor that led to Gryffindor Tower and the staircase that led down to the dungeons, they stopped. 9 days, she said. 9 days. He paused. Sirius arrives Thursday. Croker confirmed his Wisengamot standing 2 days ago, he's formally recognized as advocate. The full case documentation is with the court clerk. He looked at her. We're ready. Yes, she said. Get some sleep. You too. She turned toward the dungeon staircase, then paused, a half pause, not the deliberate Columbo stop that Dumbledore performed, just a genuine hesitation, a person on the edge of saying something they hadn't fully decided to say. "Harry." He waited. "What you said in the Great Hall," she said, without turning fully. "About his good intentions being the most troubling part." A pause. "I've been thinking about that. About what it means for the hearing. He's going to stand up and make an argument that everything he did was love. And some people in that room are going to want to believe it." She was quiet for a moment. "You need to be ready for that not to be enough." He thought about the 30 pages. About Sharpclaw's chart, the 2 diverging lines. About 14 months old. About the word survivable. "I know," he said. "It's not enough." "Good," she said, and went down the stairs, and he went up, and the castle held them both in its old, warm, complicated dark. Thursday arrived with Sirius and the particular chaos that Sirius's arrival had always produced, not through any fault of his own but simply as a condition of his existence. He was a person who generated energy the way some people generated noise, and in the context of the current situation, arriving at the Shrieking Shack at 8 in the morning with a leather satchel full of legal documents and the expression of a man who had been waiting for this specific fight for the better part of a decade, the energy was considerable. "Croaker came through," Sirius said, before Harry had fully sat down. He spread the satchel's contents on the floor: parchments, legal references, 2 sealed court documents. "Full advocate standing, recognized by the Wizengamot clerk. I'm formally Harry's legal representative." He looked at Harry with the combined ferocity and tenderness that was so specific to Sirius that nothing else in Harry's experience came close to it. "How are you? You look different." "Full restoration Friday," Harry said. "All 94 cleared." Sirius exhaled. Slow and complete, the breath of someone releasing something they'd been holding for a long time. Then he pulled Harry into a hug that was brief and hard and said everything that Sirius was not going to put into words, and Harry let it, and the warmth of it settled something he hadn't known was still waiting to settle. "Right," Sirius said, pulling back. He was bright-eyed, focused, running on the specific energy of someone in their element. "Tell me about the Gringotts break-in." Harry told him. Sirius listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough to indicate the seriousness with which he was treating the information. When Harry finished, Sirius was quiet for a moment, then said, "Fudge." Grayson signed testimony. Witnessed by Sharpclaw. "Fudge is going to throw Dumbledore to the Wizengamot to save himself," Sirius said immediately. "He's not loyal, Fudge, he's self-preserving. The moment the Ministry involvement is on record, his strategy will be to distance himself and direct blame upward. Which means by the time we reach the hearing, we may have the Minister of Magic actively corroborating our version of events." "I hadn't thought of that," Harry said. "I've been thinking about Ministry psychology for 14 years in Azkaban," Sirius said pleasantly. "I have opinions." Daphne was at the corner of the room with Blaise, who had come this time without protest and was reading through the legal documents with the focused attention of someone with a good mind and the sense to apply it. He looked up and said, "There's a problem." Everyone looked at him. "The hearing is in 9 days, Blaise said. The Wizengamot has 47 members. Of those 47, I can identify, from family connections, from my mother's social network, which is extensive and well-maintained, 11 who are directly or indirectly indebted to Dumbledore. Professionally, financially, historically." He set down the document. "That's not a majority. But it's enough to slow a vote. To introduce procedural challenges. To request recesses and independent assessments that push the timeline past the Hogwarts semester break, during which Harry would be required to return to Privet Drive. Which is where the blood wards are," Hermione said, from her position near the wall where she'd been reading with the focused stillness of someone in the final phase of a large project. "The blood wards lost their power source when the redirections were removed. But Privet Drive is still Dumbledore's territory in terms of physical access and influence. He can't touch me magically anymore, Harry said. The restrictions are gone. He doesn't need to touch your magic, Blaise said. He just needs you isolated, away from us, away from Sirius, away from the case infrastructure, for 2 weeks over the Christmas break. He needs to talk to you. One-on-one, or with controlled witnesses. He paused. He's not going to abandon trying to persuade you. It's his first instinct. If he can get you alone, he can't, Daphne said. She said it with complete flatness, the tone of something decided rather than something hoped for. Harry's emancipation petition is filed. Until it's ruled on, he's still technically a minor, but the Guardianship Act has a provision, Section 21, I found it this week, that allows a petitioner for emancipation to reside with a named adult during the petition period, rather than their legal guardian, if evidence of guardianship harm is provided with the petition. You put that in the petition, Harry said. I put that in the petition. She met his eyes. Sirius is named as the alternative residence. If the emancipation petition is approved before the break, which, with Category 1 assault findings in the evidentiary basis, it should be, you're with Sirius for Christmas. Sirius had a very specific expression. I have, he said, genuinely never met anyone like you. You've met very few Slytherins, Daphne said, without modesty. To be fair, that's also true. Blaise almost smiled. It was the particular smile of someone watching something they'd predicted play out correctly, quiet and satisfied. So the 11 Wizengamot members, he said. We need to neutralize them. Not politically, we can't match Dumbledore's decades of relationship building in 9 days. We need to make their procedural challenges irrelevant. How? Ron said. He'd been quiet through most of this. Ron processed complex strategic situations by listening first, speaking when he had something concrete, a quality that Harry had come to rely on. If they file challenges, we preempt them, Daphne said. Every challenge they can file has a rebuttal in the statute if you know where to look. I've been compiling the counter-arguments. She produced a document from her bag, 12 pages, dense, in her vertical script. Each potential procedural challenge, its statutory basis, and the counter-provision that neutralizes it. Sharpclaw has already reviewed it. He agrees it's comprehensive. Hermione took the document and began reading it immediately, which was as close to a formal endorsement as Hermione ever gave to someone else's legal research without having read it first. She was on page 2 when she said, quietly, "This is very good work." "Thank you," Daphne said. "How long did it take you?" 4 nights. Hermione looked up from the document briefly, with an expression that was clearly recalibrating in the same way Sirius's had. She went back to reading. Sirius picked up the case documents and squared them on the floor in front of him with the focused energy of someone settling into work they know and love. Right. 9 days. Harry, I need to brief you on Wizengamot procedure, specifically what happens when you give your statement, because the way you speak is going to matter as much as what you say. Not performance. Just clarity. The way you talked in the Great Hall. I want that. You heard about the Great Hall? Harry said. Blaise wrote to my contact in Edinburgh, Sirius said. Second paragraph of your strategy clearly says, inform Sirius of major public events. He included a description. He grinned, briefly, fierce and proud. I nearly operated directly to the hall to shake your hand. The wards would have been annoyed, Harry said. Worth it, Sirius said. They worked. The Shrieking Shack had never been so heavily used in whatever its long history contained, the floor covered in documents, the cold air made bearable by a conjured fire, 5 teenagers and 1 recently emerged from hiding man building a legal case that was 8 days from being presented in the most significant courtroom in British wizarding history. At some point, Tracy arrived with tea and sandwiches in a charmed insulated bag, surveyed the room, and said, I brought enough for 7, which meant she'd known Sirius would be here, which nobody had told her, which said something about Tracy Davis's intelligence network that Daphne accepted as simply a feature of the world. The morning moved into afternoon. The documents were refined, the legal arguments sharpened, the timeline confirmed. Sirius and Hermione had a 20-minute argument about the optimal ordering of evidentiary presentation, which Harry and Daphne and Ron observed with varying degrees of amusement and which Blaise resolved by pointing out they were both right about different aspects and they could structure the presentation to use both orderings in sequence. Nobody pointed out that a group of teenagers had just built a legal case capable of standing in the Wizengamot against the most powerful wizard in Britain. Nobody needed to. The evening before the hearing, Harry went to the astronomy tower. Not for any strategic reason. Just because it was the highest point in the castle and he had always gone high when he needed to think clearly, a habit that predated Hogwarts, rooted in the years when the airing cupboard was too small and too airless and the only place in Privet Drive where he could breathe was on the roof of the garden shed. The sky was clear. Rare for December, for Scotland, a night that had decided, against the local meteorological tradition, to be absolutely crisp and starlit and vast. He could see as far as the tree-line of the Forbidden Forest, the gleam of the lake, the distant lights of Hogsmeade. He stood at the tower's edge and felt the castle beneath him, familiar and warm, and the night air around him, cold and clean, and himself in the middle of it, complete and full and ready. He heard her footsteps on the stairs. He'd felt her presence coming, the empathy, attuned now to specific signatures the way an ear gets attuned to familiar voices. He didn't turn around. She came to stand beside him at the tower's edge, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her in the cold air. She looked out at the same view. "You should sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's a long day." "I will." He paused. "I wanted a minute first." She looked at the sky. The stars were very clear. Orion was directly above them, which Harry had always liked, for reasons he'd never examined too closely. "Are you afraid?" she said. "No." He thought about it more carefully. "I was. For years, in a way I didn't really name. Not of Voldemort, specifically, more of everything not working out. Of fighting and losing. Of never quite being enough." He looked out at the lake. "That's gone." "The removal," she said. "Partly." "And partly," he stopped. "Tried again. This. The last 3 weeks. Building something that was actually solid. Having people around me who were thinking clearly and moving deliberately and not telling me to wait or be patient or trust that things would work out." He turned to look at her. "You built this." "We built this," she said, without turning. "You fought the goblin infiltrators in a corridor at 3 in the morning. Sirius is your advocate. Hermione wrote half the legal rebuttals. Ron kept everyone fed and emotionally stable," Harry said, "which is actually more important than people give him credit for." Something genuinely warm moved across her face. "Yes. It is." A pause. The lake glittered below them. Somewhere in the Forbidden Forest, something moved through the tree-line, too large and too quiet to be anything ordinary. "Daphne," he said. After tomorrow. When this is done." He paused, picking the words with care. "I'd like to not go back to the way things were." She turned her head. Looked at him. "I mean between houses," he said. "The way I'd nod at Zabini and not mean anything by it. The way you'd walk past the Gryffindor table and we'd exist in completely separate worlds." He held her gaze. "I don't want that." Her expression was the careful, precise one, the one he now knew was not coldness but its opposite, intense attention, the way she looked when something mattered to her. "What do you want?" she said. "I want to keep building things with someone who's actually paying attention." He paused. "If you're interested." The silence was long enough to be real, and he let it be real, because pushing was not how this worked with her and he knew that. "I'm interested," she said. She said it the same way she'd said everything from the moment she'd sat across from him in the alcove with a document case on the bench between them, directly, honestly, without embellishment or qualification. Just the thing itself, given clearly. He turned back to the view. She turned back to the view. They stood at the edge of the astronomy tower in the December starlight with 8 hours until the hearing, and the silence between them was the good kind, the kind that doesn't need filling, the kind that exists because two people are simply present in the same place and it's enough. "Sleep," she said finally. "Going now," he said. But neither of them moved for another few minutes, and the stars were very clear, and the castle held them both, warm and ancient and alive. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. The Wisengamot chamber was older than the ministry building that contained it. Harry had been in it once before, 5th year, his own disciplinary hearing, the one where he'd sat in a chair with chains and Dumbledore had arrived late on purpose and saved him with the easy authority of a man who owned the room. He remembered the cold, the stone, the 50-something faces arranged in tiered benches above him, the specific smallness of being 16 years old in a space designed to make you feel small. He didn't feel small today. The chamber was the same cold, the same stone, the same tiered benches. The morning light came through high narrow windows and hit the floor in pale, precise bars. The 50 chairs were filling as Harry, Sirius, and Daphne came through the main entrance at 9:45, the legal team arriving ahead of the session start because Sirius had been in professional legal contexts before and understood that arriving when you're supposed to arrive was not the same as arriving when you needed to. Harry wore his school robes, Sirius had suggested muggle clothes and Hermione had suggested something formal, and Harry had decided that showing up as exactly what he was, a Hogwarts 6th year who had been magically assaulted for most of his life, was more truthful than dressing the part of something else. The school robes had felt right in his hands this morning and he'd put them on without second-guessing it. Daphne, beside him, wore dark green, not Slytherin green, something deeper, with silver at the cuffs. Professional and precise and entirely herself. Sirius wore wizarding formal robes, the real kind, the kind that came with a black family crest that he deliberately left unobscured, because part of what today was about was making certain the Wisengamot understood that the House of Black was formally and publicly behind Harry James Potter. Sharpclaw was already there. He was seated at the advocates' table, the formal setting included positions for all presenting parties, and Gringotts had been granted presenting status by the court clerk, which meant Sharpclaw had a chair at the table and the right to speak to the findings directly. He looked up when Harry sat down beside him. His 3 leather document cases were in front of him, each one closed, each one carrying a different section of the evidence. "Mr. Potter," he said. "Sharpclaw." Harry looked at the 3 cases. "Thank you. For all of this." The work was its own justification, Sharpclaw said, which was the most personal thing Harry had heard him say, and he meant it in the way goblins meant things, completely, without sentiment, but completely. Sirius took his position at the advocate's standing desk, laid his documents flat, and looked at the filing with the expression of a man who had spent 14 years in Azkaban partly because a system had failed him and who was now standing inside that system with a case he intended to win. He looked calm. He looked, Harry thought, like James Potter must have looked at a Quidditch pitch, settled, capable, exactly where he was supposed to be. The 47 Wisengamot members filed in over the next 10 minutes. Harry watched them. He knew from Blaze's analysis which 11 were likely to be Dumbledore's allies, he'd memorized their faces from the roster Sirius had given him, and he watched them take their seats and noted the ones who looked at him and the ones who deliberately didn't. The chief warlock was Madame Longbottom, Augusta Longbottom, Neville's grandmother, who had held the position for 11 years and who ran the chamber with the specific, weaponized formality of a woman who had decided long ago that procedural correctness was the highest form of justice. Harry caught Neville's eye from the public gallery, where Neville had come as a supporter, and Neville gave him the same steady nod he'd given in the herbology greenhouse. Augusta Longbottom struck the chamber with the formal staff and said, "The session is called to order. The matter before this body is Magical Inheritance Audit Case Reference GBA, 1997-449, presented by Gringotts Magical Assessment Division, in the matter of Harry James Potter vs. illegal magical interference. All parties are present. Presenting advocate, state your standing. Sirius Orion Black, Sirius said, of the noble and most ancient house of Black, formerly incarcerated without trial, currently petitioning for full exoneration through separate proceedings, and formally designated legal advocate to Harry James Potter as his godfather under the terms of the Godfathers' Covenant of 1712. I present formal documentation of all stated standing. He set 3 sealed parchments on the advocate's desk. My standing is impeccable and my documentation is comprehensive. One of the 11, a heavy-set wizard in the 3rd tier named Horatio Umbridge, no relation to Dolores but cut from the same institutional cloth, started to rise. Chief Warlock, I wish to raise a question of standing. The documentation has been reviewed by the court clerk, Augusta Longbottom said, without looking at him. Standing is confirmed. Sit down, Horatio. A fractional pause. Please. Horatio Umbridge sat down. Harry did not look at the door through which Dumbledore had not yet entered. He kept his eyes forward and his hands loose in his lap and felt the chamber's magic around him, old and institutional, layered with centuries of proceedings, carrying the particular weight of a room where decisions had been made that changed the shape of the world. He could feel every person in it. He could feel the 47 members and their different emotional textures, some of them apprehensive, some hostile, some openly curious, some with the specific quality of people who had already decided and were waiting to confirm it. He could feel, precisely, when Dumbledore entered. Not because of the door or the footsteps or the shift in the room's attention, though all of those things happened. Because his magical presence preceded him like the weather preceding a storm, enormous, layered, old in the way that only a century and a half of sustained magical development makes a person old, vast and warm, and carrying within it the specific signature he'd been reading in the audit report for weeks. He felt it and he held still and he let it simply be a fact, the way you let weather be a fact. Dumbledore walked to the respondents' area. He was alone, no advocate, which was a deliberate statement, the statement of a man so confident in his own ability to speak for himself that engaging an advocate would signal doubt. He wore deep blue robes and carried nothing. He looked, as he always looked, like the most significant person in any room he entered. He met Harry's eyes as he took his position, and Harry looked back at him, and what passed between them was not hostility. It was something more complicated than hostility. It was recognition. 2 people who had been in an asymmetric relationship for 16 years seeing each other, possibly for the first time, as equals in the same space. Dumbledore inclined his head, slightly. Harry looked forward. Sirius opened. He had been practicing the opening since Edinburgh, Harry knew, and it showed, not in a rehearsed quality but in the opposite, the ease of someone who had found the truest version of what they needed to say and now simply said it. He laid out the case in 12 minutes. He was concise, specific, and completely unafraid. He named the 94 interferences by category and number. He named the 7 active drains and their 15-year duration. He named the single magical signature across all 94, identified by Gringotts with a confidence rating of 99.7%. He did not say Dumbledore's name in the opening. He let the evidence say it for him, which was both more legal and more devastating. When he sat down, 4 of the 47 members were visibly pale. Sharpclaw presented next. He stood at the Goblin advocate's position, and the chamber went very still in the specific way it went still for Goblin testimony, not respectful exactly. The wizarding world's relationship with goblins was too complicated for simple respect, but attentive in the way that people are attentive when they understand that what they're hearing cannot be disputed. He opened the first document case. He walked the chamber through the findings in the methodical, impeccable, 41 years of experience way that was his trademark. He used visual aids, a spell that projected the audit's magical notation onto the chamber's front wall in clear amber light, the 2-line chart from the final page enlarged to fill the space, the diverging trajectories of Harry's actual and natural development visible to every person in the room. He named the signature at the end. He named it in goblin notation first, then translated it into English, signature consistent with Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, confidence 99.7%. The chamber made a sound. Not words, just a collective release of breath, 50 people having the same involuntary response to the same confirmation. Dumbledore did not react. He sat with his hands folded and his expression the same sad, complicated calm it had carried since he walked in. Then Sirius said, "The presenting party calls Harry James Potter to make his statement." Harry stood. He walked to the statement position, which was the central floor of the chamber, the same floor where the chair with chains stood during criminal proceedings, the chains currently folded away, the floor just stone. He stood on it without the chair, without anything to hold on to, and looked up at the tiered faces of 47 witches and wizards who had the power to determine what happened next. He'd thought about this moment. Not the speech, he hadn't prepared a speech, because prepared speeches were Dumbledore's method and he was done doing anything that was Dumbledore's method. He'd thought about the truest version of what he needed to say and he intended to say that. "I'm not going to make an argument," he said. Sirius made the argument. Sharpclaw presented the evidence. "What I want to do is tell you what it was like." He paused. The chamber was completely silent. "I've been at Hogwarts since I was 11. Every year there's been something, a challenge, a threat, a crisis with my name on it. A stone at the end of a corridor. A basilisk. A Triwizard Cup that was a portkey to a graveyard. Voldemort, every single year, coming back or coming through or sending someone in his place." He kept his voice even. "Every year, I survived. And every year, the story was that I was lucky, or brave, or that something protected me, some old magic from my mother that kept finding ways to be enough." Several members in the upper tiers were very still. "I want you to understand what it actually was. Every duel, every confrontation, every moment I faced something that should have killed me, I was doing it at 38% of my natural magical capacity. At 57%. At whatever percentage the most recent removal had freed up, because the sessions happened while I was still at Hogwarts, still going to class, still navigating a school year." He let that land. "I've been fighting for my life, repeatedly, with my hands tied behind my back. Not metaphorically. Literally. The binding on my dueling instinct alone." He stopped. Not because he lost his composure. Because he was choosing where to go with this, and he'd decided before he stood up that he would not perform anger, that the facts were angry enough on their own. "I don't know what I would have been," he said. "Without the 94. I don't know what choices I would have made, what paths I would have taken, who I would have become. The goblin chart shows the projected line, what my development should have looked like. But it can't show me who I would have been. What I would have decided if I'd had full access to my own mind, my own instincts, my own sense of what I wanted as opposed to what I'd been shaped to want." A pause. "I've spent 6 years being managed. I didn't know that's what it was. I thought it was guidance." He looked at Dumbledore then. Directly. For the first time since the session began. "I don't think he wanted me to suffer," Harry said. "I think he was genuinely trying to protect something, some version of a future that he decided was necessary, and he built me to fit it. I think he believed in what he was doing, every step of it. I think the 94 spells were placed with something he called love." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "But I also think that a love that needs to take away your ability to choose is not love. It's ownership. And I am not anyone's property." The chamber was so quiet he could hear the pale winter light coming through the windows. "I'm asking for the formal record of what was done to me to be established in law," Harry said, turning back to the chamber. "Not revenge. Not punishment decided by me. That's the court's function, not mine. I'm asking for the truth to be on record, permanently, so that no one can pretend it didn't happen. And I'm asking for my emancipation to be formally granted, so that my choices about my own magic, my own life, my own future, belong to me." He paused. "They always should have." He walked back to his seat. Sirius's jaw was tight and his eyes were very bright, and he was doing the thing with his hands, pressing them together, and he looked at Harry and gave him one single, definitive nod. Daphne, beside Harry, did not look at him. But her hand, on the arm of her chair, moved 1 inch toward his. The very tips of their fingers, barely. A fraction of contact. He didn't look at it. Neither did she. It was enough. Dumbledore spoke. He was given the respondent's opportunity per procedure, and he took it, and he spoke for 20 minutes, and Harry listened to every word. The argument was, as Harry had predicted and as Daphne had prepared him for, rooted in love and necessity and the weight of a terrible responsibility that few people could understand. Dumbledore's voice was warm and measured and carried the full force of a century and a half of wisdom, the voice of a man who had been right about enough things for long enough that even the people who now knew he was wrong found themselves hesitating, wanting to believe there was a version of this that made sense, some angle from which 94 illegal spells on an infant were the right thing to do. He did not apologize. He explained. There was a difference. He spoke about the prophecy. About Voldemort. About the specific, terrible calculus of a war that required a weapon capable enough to win but controllable enough not to become the next threat. He spoke about the blood wards and the sacrifices involved in maintaining them. He spoke about his certainty, stretching back decades, that Harry needed to be protected not only from Voldemort but from his own potential, that an Omega-tier core unguided, unmanaged, in the hands of a boy raised without magical education until the age of 11, was a danger he had taken steps to contain. "I made choices that were not mine to make," he said, near the end. "I am aware of that. I am not unaware of the harm in them." He looked at Harry across the chamber floor, and the sadness in his face was completely real. Harry could feel it, the empathy reading it without ambiguity, the deep, genuine grief of a man confronting the gap between his intentions and their consequences. "Harry. I am sorry for the pain this has caused you." Harry said nothing. He had said what he came to say. He had no interest in a public forgiveness scene that Dumbledore needed more than he did. Sirius, however, stood up. "Chief Warlock, the presenting party wishes to respond to one specific claim made by the respondent." He looked at Augusta Longbottom, who nodded, and he turned to address the chamber. "The respondent has argued that the restrictions on Mr. Potter's core were partly motivated by the management of his potential power, the suggestion being that an Omega-tier core in an unguided child was itself a hazard." He paused. "I want the court to understand what this argument actually requires you to accept. It requires you to accept that a child's natural magical birthright can be legally restricted by a third party, without consent, without notification, and without any review process, on the basis of that third party's assessment of potential future risk. Not actual risk. Potential. Projected. Based on power levels." He looked along the tiers. "If that argument holds, there is no Omega-tier witch or wizard in Britain who can claim their magic is their own. Because any sufficiently powerful figure could claim, under the same precedent, that their power represented a risk that required management." He set his hands on the desk. "That is not protection. That is the legal architecture of magical tyranny. And this court should not touch it." Several members of the chamber were leaning forward. Horatio Umbridge rose. "Chief Warlock, I request a procedural recess for independent assessment, under Article 14 of the Wisengamot Procedural Code," Daphne said, from the floor. Everyone turned. She hadn't stood yet. She stood now, precisely, with the composed authority of someone who had read the procedural code cover to cover and found what she needed in it. Article 14 states that a procedural recess request must be accompanied by a specific, named assessment body and a defined evidentiary gap. Requesting recess without specifying what evidence is absent and who would assess it is an incomplete motion and cannot be received. She looked at Horatio Umbridge with the calm attention of a person who is not at all afraid of him. Would the requesting member like to complete the motion? Umbridge stared at her. You're a student, he said. I'm a presenting party's legal researcher, operating under the same rules as any other member of the legal team, she said. The motion? He didn't complete the motion. He sat down, and 2 of the other 11 who had been watching the exchange also settled back in their chairs, recalibrating, and Harry thought, she has been waiting to do that since 3rd year. Augusta Longbottom said, the recess motion is not complete and is not received. We will proceed to deliberation. Deliberation took 40 minutes. Harry sat at the advocate's table and did not pace, which took effort, and looked at his hands, which were still, the gold warmth at their edges steady and calm, and thought about the years before this room, and let himself be glad that they were the years before. Daphne sat beside him and read a book, an actual book, one she'd brought in her bag, which was an act of deliberate composure so specifically her that he felt something tighten in his chest with a quality he was beginning to stop filing away and start simply acknowledging. Blaise, in the gallery above, was watching the deliberation chamber door with the focus of a chess player watching a clock. Ron was beside Neville, who had barely moved in 2 hours and whose expression had been the same since Harry's statement, the expression of someone whose world has been reorganized and who was deciding what to build in the newly cleared space. Hermione had a quill and was taking notes, which meant she was processing by documenting, which was how she managed large emotional experiences and which was completely right for her. Sirius sat beside Harry and said nothing, and the nothing was the exact right thing. At 11:47, the deliberation door opened. Augusta Longbottom struck the chamber staff. The 47 members returned to their seats. She looked at the document in her hand with the expression of a woman who had been Neville's grandmother for his entire life and who had, Harry suspected, been waiting for something like this for considerably longer. The Wisengamot finds as follows, she said, in the formal tone that made everything it described permanent. On the matter of magical inheritance audit case reference GBA, 1997-449, the court accepts the Gringotts audit findings as primary evidence. 94 counts of illegal magical interference are confirmed and entered into the formal record. 7 counts of Category 1 magical assault are confirmed and entered into the formal record. A pause. The court finds by a vote of 39-8 that the respondent, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, did place and maintain illegal magical enchantments on the person of Harry James Potter, beginning in the subject's infancy and continuing to the present day, without the subject's knowledge or consent. 39-8. 8. Not 11. 3 of Dumbledore's presumed allies had voted with the majority. Harry noted this distantly, through the specific, unusual quality of a moment that was enormous and yet somehow felt quieter than it should. The court further finds, Augusta Longbottom continued, that the attempt to destroy primary evidence at Gringotts on the night of December 6 constitutes additional criminal liability, for which this court refers the matter of Marcus Grayson and Cornelius Fudge to the Department of Magical Prosecutions for formal charging. A beat, precisely timed. The court further refers the respondent to the Department of Magical Prosecutions for formal charging on counts of illegal magical assault and violations of the Magical Persons Protection Act of 1857. The respondent is suspended from his position as headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, effective immediately, pending the outcome of those proceedings. The chamber made the sound again. Louder this time. Not chaos, controlled, structured, but definitively not the silence of a room in which something ordinary had just occurred. Augusta Longbottom waited 3 seconds, then struck the staff again. Silence. On the matter of the petition for magical emancipation of Harry James Potter, she said, the court finds, by unanimous vote, that the petition is granted. Harry James Potter is hereby recognized as a legally emancipated magical person. All guardianship provisions previously held by Albus Dumbledore over the petitioner's person, magical rights, and assets are dissolved. The petitioner's magical development record is hereby asterisked per the Finch precedent, with a formal notation that all recorded results were produced under documented illegal interference. She looked up from the document and directly at Harry, in a manner that was not entirely judicial. It was personal, and she allowed it to be. The record will reflect what this boy was capable of, not what he was permitted to show. The chamber erupted. Not in disorder, in the specific, structured noise of a formal body receiving a seismic result, the sound of 47 people and a public gallery all breathing and reacting simultaneously in a stone room with excellent acoustics. Harry sat with it. He sat with the 39-8. With the words illegal magical assault formally on a record. With his name attached to the word emancipated in a court document that would exist in the Wisengamot archives for as long as archives existed. With the specific, complete, utterly unspectacular feeling of a thing being over, not won, exactly, because the word won implied a game with sides, and this had never been a game. It had been a correction. A long overdue, hard-fought, meticulously documented correction. He became aware that Sirius was looking at him. That Sirius's hand was on his shoulder, gripping once with the specific pressure of something that couldn't be said with words, and that Sirius's face was doing the complicated thing with brightness and tightness that meant he was managing something large and choosing to manage it quietly. "Okay?" Sirius said. "Yeah," Harry said. Sirius gripped his shoulder once more and then released it, and turned to shake Sharpclaw's hand, a formal, two-handed grip, the wizard goblin version of a professional salute, and Sharpclaw received it with a gravity that suggested he too understood this was not an ordinary outcome, not an ordinary day. Harry looked across the chamber. Dumbledore was still in the respondents' area. He had not moved during the verdict. He sat with his hands folded and his expression the same sad, complicated calm, and he was looking at Harry. Just looking, not with the Legilimens probe, not with the warm authoritative benevolence of the man who had managed Harry's whole life, just looking, stripped of everything strategic, the face of someone who had been told the truth about themselves and was, perhaps for the first time, listening. Harry held his gaze for a long moment. Then he stood, and turned away, and let it be done. Outside the Wisengamot chamber, in the cool stone corridor of the ministry's lower level, the world reassembled itself. Ron appeared from the gallery stairs and walked directly to Harry and said, 39-8, mate, with the compressed, fierce satisfaction of someone who had been waiting to say it, and Harry laughed, a real one, short and releasing, and they walked together out into the ministry atrium without needing more words than that. Hermione appeared beside Ron, her notes tucked under her arm, and she looked at Harry with the specific expression she'd worn the morning after every terrible year, the face of someone who was still upright, still herself, still here, and relieved to find the same was true of the person across from her. "It's done," she said. Like she needed to hear herself say it. "It's done," he confirmed. Neville had found his grandmother in the corridor, and Augusta Longbottom was saying something to him in a low voice with an expression that Harry couldn't read from the distance but that made Neville stand slightly straighter, which was saying something, because Neville already stood pretty straight these days. He caught Harry's eye and nodded once more, and Harry nodded back. Luna drifted out of the gallery exit and stopped in front of Harry and looked at him with her usual clear, unguarded attention. "The Raxperts are completely gone," she said. "All of them. You look very clear." She smiled. "It suits you." "Thanks, Luna," he said. She drifted onward, apparently satisfied. Sirius came out last, moving with the ease of someone who had just completed something they were built for, and he stopped beside Harry in the atrium and looked at the golden ceiling with its whirling magical proclamations and said, "We need to celebrate. Properly. Not the shrieking shack, somewhere with decent food and no resident hysteria charms." "Edinburgh?" Harry said. "Edinburgh," Sirius agreed. "Give me a week to make the safe house actually habitable. Then you come for Christmas." He looked at Harry with the uncomplicated joy of someone who had just been given something they'd been afraid to ask for. "Your first Christmas with family." Harry thought about every Christmas before this one. "Yeah," he said. "My first." Daphne was in the corridor outside the chamber entrance, leaning against the stone wall, not waiting in any obvious way, just present, looking at nothing in particular, in the manner of someone who has completed an enormous thing and is having a quiet moment with the completion of it. Blaise was somewhere behind her, on his phone. He was the only person Harry knew who maintained serious contact with the Muggle world entirely on his own terms, and apparently the post-verdict period was the time to use it. Harry separated from the group naturally and walked over. She looked up when he approached, and the look on her face was something he hadn't seen before, not the careful precision or the professional attention or the slight, real warmth that came through the control. This was the underneath of all of that. This was Daphne Greengrass without the 17 reasons assembled and ready, just a person in a corridor having had the enormous, quiet, complete feeling of being entirely right about something that mattered. 39-8, she said. 39-8. He stopped in front of her. 3 of Dumbledore's 11 voted with the majority. Sirius's opening argument, she said. The magical tyranny framing. I watched their faces when he made it. They couldn't vote against it without voting for the principle that power justifies control. A pause. Good argument. You told him to make it, Harry said. I mentioned the statutory basis for it. Daphne. She looked at him with the underneath of everything face. We made a good argument. We did. He held her gaze. What happens now? Now Dumbledore faces formal prosecution. Fudge faces formal prosecution. Gringotts files the full audit record with the Ministry's permanent archive, where it cannot be removed. The Hogwarts Board of Governors appoints an interim headmaster. She paused. McGonagall, probably. I can't imagine they'd choose anyone else. She'll be good, he said. She'll be very good. A pause. The emancipation means you have full control of your Gringotts assets. Your parents' vault, the Potter estate accounts, all of it is yours to access and manage as of today. She said it factually, but with a care underneath the facts. There's apparently quite a lot. Your family was old money. He nodded. He'd think about that later, what it meant, what to do with it. Right now it was one more dimension of the thing that had been given back to him, and he was going to need time to understand the shape of it. Daphne, he said. I need to ask you something. She waited. The audit, you filed it on a theory. You'd noticed something in third year that bothered you and you held it for 3 years and then you acted on it. He looked at her steadily. What made you act then? That specific week. What was the tipping point? She was quiet for a moment. The corridor was gradually emptying, people moving toward the lifts, the session-end traffic of the Ministry building moving in its usual purposeful streams around them. The Triwizard, she said. 3rd year I noticed the anomaly. 4th year I watched you survive something that should have been impossible, and I watched you come back from it, and I watched the way the school and the Ministry and Dumbledore managed the aftermath, and I thought, they're managing him. Not the crisis. Him. The way they talked about you, the way the story was shaped, the way you kept ending up back in the same position no matter what happened. She paused. 5th year I watched you fight Voldemort possessing you at the Ministry and I felt your magic from 200 feet away and I knew. What I'd seen in 3rd year wasn't a fluke. There was something enormous in you that wasn't getting out, and someone knew it and had arranged it that way. She looked at the corridor. I spent the summer researching the audit process. I spent September and October deciding whether it was my place. I spent November deciding that place was irrelevant. He was quiet for a moment. You watched all of that for 3 years and said nothing to anyone. I said it to Tracy once. She said maybe you were just powerful. A very slight pause. She was right, just not in the way she meant. He looked at her. The underneath of everything face was still there, and he thought about the astronomy tower and the stars and I'm interested said with the directness of something completely decided, and about the tips of fingers on chair arms in the Wisengamot chamber, the fraction of contact that had been exactly what it needed to be. Come to Edinburgh for Christmas, he said. She blinked. It was the smallest blink, but he caught it, a genuine surprise, which he discovered he valued, having given it to her. That's Sirius's house. Sirius's house has apparently several spare rooms and a man who is deeply, personally grateful to you, which means if I ask him, he'll be annoyed that I didn't ask sooner. He held her gaze. Tracy too, if she wants. Blaze, if he can be persuaded to leave somewhere warmer. The very slight smile appeared. Real and specific, the one that changed her face. He cannot be persuaded to leave somewhere warmer, she said. He has a strong position on December in Scotland. Then it'll be the four of us plus Sirius and whoever else shows up. He paused. Ron and Hermione are going to the Burrow, but they'll come through for New Year's. Neville's, Harry. What? Yes, she said. Simple. Complete. The same way she'd said everything that mattered. He breathed out. Good. Also, she said, you should know that Blaze is going to want credit for this. Not publicly. But to you, specifically. He'll want you to know that he was helpful. Harry glanced across the corridor at Blaze, who was finishing his call and who looked up at exactly that moment with an expression of complete inscrutability. He was helpful, Harry said. I'll tell him. He'll pretend not to care. I'll tell him anyway. She looked at the corridor again, at the ministry building around them, at the atrium visible through the corridor's end with its golden ceiling and its formal declarations and the daily business of a magical world going about its existence in all the complicated, imperfect ways that magical worlds do. The world's going to change, she said. Because of today. Not immediately. Not dramatically. But Dumbledore's prosecution changes things for a lot of people who've been depending on his version of events. A pause. It'll be uncomfortable. There are people who needed to believe in him. I know. Harry looked at the atrium. There's going to be more work after today, not less. Yes. You still interested? She turned to look at him, and the underneath of everything face had settled into something more integrated now, the precision and the warmth together, the careful mind and the real person behind it occupying the same expression without tension. I told you, she said. I don't do things without a reason. What's the reason? She looked at him for a moment with the full, clear, unguarded attention of someone who has stopped managing how much they show. You, she said. Obviously. He felt it land in the way good things land when you've stopped bracing for bad things, clean and warm and completely real. He didn't say anything clever. He didn't say anything at all. He just looked at her in the cool ministry corridor with the sounds of the atrium carrying and the winter light coming through the high windows, and she looked back, and it was enough, more than enough, it was the truest thing he'd felt on a day full of true things. Sirius appeared around the corridor corner, saw them, and visibly redirected his path to avoid them, which he did with the absolute transparent subtlety of a man who was very happy for two people and trying extremely hard to look like he hadn't noticed them. Daphne noticed. Harry noticed her noticing. They both looked at Sirius's retreating back. He's not subtle, Harry said. Not even slightly, she agreed. They walked toward the atrium together, and the ministry building moved around them in its usual purposeful currents, and Harry Potter, legally emancipated, magically whole, carrying 38 years of stolen development finally returned and 43 more removed and himself entire for the first time in his life, walked through the golden-lit atrium of the Ministry of Magic on a December morning and felt, not triumphant, not relieved, not the specific complicated exhaustion of a thing. Survived. He felt free. Simply, completely, unremarkably free. The way things feel when they're finally what they are. Outside, the December air was cold and sharp and the London sky was pale grey above the telephone box entrance, and Daphne's shoulder was warm against his in the cramped space of the box, and Sirius was saying something about lunch, proper lunch, somewhere they know how to cook, and Ron was already arguing about where, which was deeply and perfectly Ron, and Hermione was looking up Muggle restaurants on something she called a smartphone that Blaze had apparently introduced her to, and Neville was laughing at something Luna had just said with the full, unguarded laugh of someone who had stopped being careful about taking up space. Harry looked up at the pale grey sky and thought about the 2 lines on Sharpclaw's chart. The lower one, labeled actual. The upper one, labeled natural. He was on the upper line now. He was living in the space that had always been his and had simply, for a long time, been borrowed. It was his. It had always been his. He was keeping it.